leaks in the kitchen and excessive amounts of material that you send through your garbage disposal, really most of that can be disposed of in your food waste container.
Jay, I have a two-part question for you. Why do you need that rate increase? And are sewer rates based on water usage?
Well, good questions. And the first part of that is the reason that we need the rate increases for the next several years are because of the operational and maintenance costs for both the city's system and the Silicon Valley Clean Water treatment plant, but also for the major capital improvements that are needed to be done. These are significant investments that have not been asked for in years past, and in particular at the Silicon Valley Clean Water plant. This is a plant that was built in 1980 that has not been upgraded significantly since that time. So virtually all the process systems, equipment, and everything else are wearing out at the same time. And so they have a massive capital program, and that's what our 15% share goes towards at the treatment plant, is to replace those improvement parts and everything else to help keep it functioning and delivering the treated effluent that's needed. The second part of the question is, are the sewer rates based on the amount of water used? And the answer to that question is no. Essentially, the sewer system, as it's provided to each of the residences and businesses in town, essentially it doesn't matter if the particular location uses lots of water or a little bit of water. And especially from a residential standpoint, the pipes are the same size, the mains are the same size, so we don't have a higher cost to convey or treat the wastewater based on the amount of water that gets used. It's a pretty common question to get asked, and yet in our case we have a system that has a fixed cost of operating it and a known cost to repair and replace it. And so we feel like a flat rate for sewer is probably the best way to go.
Thank you, Jay. It sounds like we could do a better job of maintaining the health of our sewer system. For more about this, you can visit the website for the City of San Carlos. This is City Hall in Focus. I'm Gloria Cohn.
this evening. Councilmember Ruck is on his way, but we're going to go ahead and start because we have a really full agenda tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the City Council Successor Agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting for May 23rd. I will go ahead and call for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll move on to item 3, changes to the order of the agenda. Any changes from staff this evening?
No changes from staff this evening, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any changes from my colleagues this evening? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, which are presentations. Item A is present a proclamation and life-saving award to Stefan Flowers, Samantha Van Dyke, and Lance Sheets, and a proclamation and sheriff's commendation certificate to deputies Joseph Venikov and Daniel Johnson for their actions in San Carlos on March 12th, 2022. If you all would like to join me up front, that would be great. Good evening. Okay, first I'm going to start with the proclamation for Stefan Flowers, Lance Sheets, and Samantha Van Dyke. And I'm going to go ahead and read the proclamation this evening. Whereas on Saturday, March 12th, 2022, at approximately 2:12 a.m., Lance Sheets was in the vicinity of 2708 San Carlos Avenue and observed a vehicle after it had collided into a tree and had caught fire. And whereas Lance Sheets sprang into action, calling 911, and then surveyed the condition of the occupants in the vehicle, and whereas realizing he needed assistance, he flagged down passing motorists Stefan Flowers and Samantha Van Dyke to aid him in removing one of the conscious occupants out of the car and physically removing the remaining two occupants who were unconscious and unresponsive from the vehicle while the entire front of the vehicle was fully engulfed in flames. And whereas a catastrophe was avoided because of the selfless and rapid response of Stefan Flowers, Lance Sheets, and Samantha Van Dyke, and whereas this courageous action in averting what could have been a tragic loss to family, friends, and the community was an act of heroism which deserves special recognition by the City Council of the City of San Carlos. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Sarah McDowell, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby tender this proclamation with the deepest gratitude and sincere appreciation to Stefan Flowers, Lance Sheets, and Samantha Van Dyke for their life-saving action presented this 23rd day of May, 2022. You all can stay up here with me, it's okay. Now we're going to present a proclamation to Daniel Johnson. Would you like to come over here? I'm going to read your proclamation too. Whereas on Saturday, March 12th at approximately 2:12 a.m., San Mateo County Sheriff's Office deputies assigned to the San Carlos Police Bureau were dispatched to 2708 San Carlos Avenue on the report of a vehicle collision. And whereas prior to arrival, Deputy Daniel Johnson and Deputy Joseph Venikov were notified that the vehicle had struck a tree and was engulfed in flames. And whereas upon arrival, Deputies Johnson and Venikov approached witnesses Stefan Flowers, Samantha Van Dyke, and Lance Lance Sheets and the 3 occupants of the vehicle who were now out of the engulfed car. And whereas the 3 occupants were suffering from significant injuries, 2 of which were unconscious and unresponsive. And whereas a catastrophe was avoided because of the skilled and rapid response of Deputies Johnson and Venikoff, who immediately relocated the 2 injured parties away from the immediate area of the burning vehicle to a safer location away from the flames. And whereas this action in averting what could have been a tragic loss to family, friends, and the community deserves special recognition by the City Council of the City of San Carlos. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Sarah McDowell, Mayor of the City of San Carlos, on behalf of the City Council, do hereby tender this proclamation with the deepest gratitude and sincere appreciation to Deputy Daniel Johnson and Deputy Joseph Venikoff for their actions of assisting the vehicle's occupants to safety, presented this 23rd day of May. Thank you so much. We now have Sheriff Bolanos, who's going to come up and give you some recognition as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Mayor McDowell, honorable members of the City Council, City Manager Malpe, and city staff. I'm Sheriff Carlos Bolanos. I want to thank the City Council for the proclamations honoring Lance Sheets, Stefan Flowers, Samantha Van Dyke, and Deputies Daniel Johnson and Joseph Venikoff, who cannot be here tonight. It is my honor to present Sheriff's Office life-saving medals to Lance Sheets, Stefan Flowers, and Samantha Van Dyke, and certificates of commendation to the 2 deputies involved, Daniel Johnson, who's here today. The life-saving medal is awarded to any community member who performs an exceptional act under emergency conditions where a service is rendered that results directly in sustaining a human life. And these 3 did just that with their extrication on March 12th. Our 2 deputies provided extraordinary service with their selfless actions and assistance, which allowed the vehicle's occupants to remain as safe as possible. Thank you all for aiding the victims of the vehicle collision. The Sheriff's Office is grateful to you for your selfless act, risking your own health to save the lives of others. Without this life-saving act, the outcome could have been deadly. We are thankful to have you in our community, working with us to maintain public safety. Thank you.
Okay, as the chamber clears out, we are going to move on to item 4B, present proclamations recognizing Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu for their leadership and volunteer efforts with the Industrial Arts Mural. Annie and Lauren, if you'd like to join me up front. Hi. So I'll start by saying that I attended the Community Paint Day and I met you both, and I was so impressed with everything that you did to organize the community and to paint this beautiful mural, Protect What You Love. What a wonderful message to our community about environmental stewardship and taking care of what you love. So I wanted to recognize you tonight with a proclamation because I know that you're so busy, and yet you've still found time to leave a beautiful legacy in our community, and I think it's really special, and I wanted to recognize you both. So I'm going to go ahead and read the proclamation to you. Whereas Design Tech High School seniors Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu, a duo collectively known as Splash of Color, are known for combining art and education to advocate for the local environment. And whereas Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu installed their first environmental protection mural in the city of Pacifica during the summer of 2021, and whereas the Community Foundation of San Carlos invited Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu to bring their artistic vision to life by designing a public mural that fosters community appreciation and engagement. And whereas partnering with AST Fabrics, Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu transformed a blank wall in the Industrial Arts District into a burst of springtime color by installing their Love More mural to serve as a vibrant reminder to protect San Carlos's native species. And whereas Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu designed the scene to incorporate indigenous plants and animals, including the miniature lupin, California poppy, blue-eyed grass, as well as the bay checker spot butterfly. And whereas the innovative volunteer efforts of Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu continue to inspire and encourage others to honor the planet and protect what you love. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Sarah McDowell, Mayor, and on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby express sincere gratitude to Annalise Phillips and Lauren Wu for bringing a splash of color to the community in the spirit of public service. Dated this 23rd day of May, 2022.
Excited to be able to bring this project to San Carlos. We started in Pacifica, and it's my hometown, San Carlos, so it's really special to be able to do something like this here. Great. Thank you.
All right. We will now move on to council communications and announcements. Are there any council communications this evening? We will go to Councilmember Dugan and then Vice Mayor Beck.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I just wanted to mention that I was invited to speak at a Rotary meeting about a week and a half ago and had a nice Q&A session. And I just wanted to call out, they recently funded a program where child seats will be placed in our patrol vehicles in town. And that's very strategic. Came at the request of our Sheriff's Department. Occasionally when they pull over a young family that might not have a proper child seat in a car, they're left with a quandary of what to do to, because the car can't continue without a car seat. So instead of what can end up being a pretty dramatic event, the sheriff now will, all of our cars will have the car seats in them and will be placed to the, in the vehicle, the child properly secured, and they'll go on about their way. And I just wanted to call that out as another great example of how the Rotary contributes to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had a wonderful time this past weekend at Hometown Days. I just want to thank Amy and her team and all the wonderful volunteers who made it such a success. And it was great to have it back and see the community engaged. And it's just a great time, and look forward to next year.
I see Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also attended the Hometown Days on Saturday and Sunday. We brought our granddaughter, our 19-month granddaughter, so it was her first Hometown Days, and she really enjoyed it. We went everywhere in the park. So, and again, I echo what Adam said. The congratulations to the city's first effort. I thought the Parks and Rec Department did a fantastic job. I got an unsolicited call today from a friend who said that she thought the city did as well as the committee did in previous years, and that she was very proud of everyone and was very grateful that it went all right. And she worked both days. So, and there is Amy. So I want to personally say thank you, Amy, to you and your entire team. Just a great job, and also to Rebecca for Mendenhall for her handling of all the finances. And apparently there were a lot of funds that were collected. So, and I'm sure that we didn't lose a dollar. So, thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Ron. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you. I'd also like to lend my thanks and gratitude to city staff and all the volunteers. I can't tell you what joy it was when I was riding my bike through town ahead of the start of the parade, and just the energy and the number of the people that were out. And I think we should have a parade every Saturday. And it was just nice for us to kind of regroup after a really long, tough couple of years. I know we still have a ways to go, but it was so much joy. So thank you to everybody.
Great comments. I'm going to echo all of the wonderful compliments to our staff. I know that many different departments were involved. Amy's department, Rebecca's, Stephen's department, and Lou did a wonderful job sprucing up our parks and getting ready and cleaning up. And I too just heard our residents were just singing the praises of having Hometown Days back. So I hope that you take that to heart and know how much you're appreciated. I also would like to thank the community for participation in our mental health first aid trainings that happened last Friday and Saturday. We had a wonderful, diverse group of participants. We had excellent instructors. I wanted to thank our city staff for helping organize that. And I want to say another thank you to our Board of Supervisors for funding these trainings that are happening throughout our county. I actually had an experience at Hometown Days where I spoke with a youth, and we talked a lot about Star Vista and the services that were available. And so that training definitely gave me some tools in my toolbox that I appreciated. The third and final comment I wanted to make under this agenda item is I noticed that Louise Rogers, our Chief of San Mateo County Health, today issued a message noting that community transmission of COVID is high and increasing. So I am wearing my mask this evening. I have never known so many people in San Carlos with COVID as I do right now. So I can tell that it is spreading in our community. And I just wanted to flag this for the council. If, perhaps we want to start thinking about what trigger we have if we want to temporarily flip back to Zoom at some point as we experience some surges in our community. And I also spoke with Crystal today to better understand how a council member would participate from home. So looking forward to getting that ironed out as well if one of us needs to stay home at some point. So just something for us to continue to think about. Any other communications this evening? Okay. We will now move on to public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so at this time. Please note that each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. And we'll go ahead. Crystal's going to introduce anyone from the public who would like to speak in person, and then we'll go to the Zoom comments. And again, this is for items not on the agenda.
I do not have any speaker cards from members of the public. I don't see any hands. So let me see. We do have 3 hands from members in Zoom. So the first up is Jennifer Anderson-Rose. If you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. There's a couple of us who want to speak here. So I just want to ask for time for all of us to speak. Thanks for the time. My name's Jennifer Rossi, and I'm a resident of Greater Eastside Community. I'm just joining tonight to follow up from our last meeting and ask you to honor the petition we brought to the city from the neighborhood. I'm asking for a clear process for the submitted petition that has the majority of residents in support of the pilot program for the cut-through traffic. And I ask you to address this at the next city council meeting as an agenda item. And please have a clear timeline for this process of honoring the petition. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing about the action that can be taken on the submitted petition. And like the mural on the east side of San Carlos says, protect what you love. Please protect our neighborhood in the face of unprecedented development. And I have 2 other young people who would like to speak here. Go ahead, Bella.
Hi, I'm Bella Rossi, and I am 7 years old. I am asking you to move forward with the partial street closure because we heard from a neighbor that a boy on the next street was riding his bike and got hit by a car. Please keep our neighborhood safe. I am asking. Thank you.
No, go ahead.
Hello, I am Emma. I live on Cherry Street, and I play with my neighbors every now and then, and we ride bikes usually. When we play, we usually have to often yell car to get kids out of the street, and I feel very unsafe with cars zipping through and driving fast. Please move forward with the partial street closure. Thank you for your time listening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Crystal, is there anyone else in the waiting room?
Yes. Next up is Molly Barton. If you can go ahead and unmute.
Good evening. My name is Molly Barton, and I am a longtime San Carlos resident. I'm speaking tonight to acknowledge the incredible work of the city employees that pulled off a glorious, grand, and joyful Hometown Days this last weekend. It was simply fabulous. Having worked at Hometown Days and with the volunteer committee for many years, I found this weekend's event, the first Hometown Days put on by the city of San Carlos, to be an undisputed success. Thank you to Amy Newby, Park and Recreation Department Director, for her leadership and support, the Park and Recreation Foundation, and all the myriad committees and city employees who labored throughout the weekend to make the event the huge success that it was. However, I would like to give a special shout out to Wendy Scatino, her assistant Lauren Schneider, and Recreation Supervisor Tyler Muella for the incredible amount of time and expertise they provided to make this event a success. The crowds came, they ate, they played, and they enjoyed the music. Thank you so much to those 3 for their commitment to this event, held by the city for the first time. And thank you, City Council, for all the support you provided to these people so that the event could be a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly.
Okay, next up we have Gina Vandelos. Go ahead and unmute.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much, City Council, for the opportunity for me to speak very briefly about the closures on the east side. I'm one of the people that got the signatures, and on Montgomery Street, we definitely got over 50% of the houses signing up for the pilot program for partial street closures. Frankly, at the last City Council, I was disappointed at the staff's report, but I'm hoping that we can move forward with this in a timely manner. And thank you very much for your consideration. That's it.
Thanks, Gina.
Okay, next up is Dimitri Vandelos. You can go ahead and unmute.
Yes, hi. Wanted to also speak briefly about the partial street closure pilot program. Before I go there, I do want to acknowledge the great work with the mural and the mental health awareness. These are super important things, and of course, Hometown Days is great to have back. So I want to thank the council for considering and providing some direction at the last meeting for the partial street closure, and want to provide just a tiny bit of context. I counted the homes on McHugh, Montgomery, Cherry, and Hall. There are roughly about 207 homes, and we had over 250 signatures. So there's very broad support for this measure. And we in particular want to make sure that in the meeting minutes that it's reflected on the clear follow-ups that were requested by council of staff moving forward. So we definitely want to see this process move forward and move along. And then lastly, regarding issues with fire and police and safety. In our proposal, there are 12 exits from our community and 5 entrances. And I do want to point out that there are 2 major developments, commercial developments. One is on 405 Industrial, and the other is at the old Bayshore Lighting, which is proposed as a hotel. Those have equivalent numbers, if not greater numbers than our entire community, yet they only have a single driveway for entrance and exit. So I'm hoping that staff, police and fire will look at, seriously look at traffic considerations and considerations for emergency access to both of those projects, given that there's only one way in, one way out. And thank you, that's it.
Thanks, Dimitri. Crystal, is there another person waiting?
Yes, we have one hand left, Greg Walker. Go ahead. There you go.
Hi. Yes, I'm Greg Walker. I also live on Cherry Street. I just wanted to make sure that the things for the street closures is top of mind and that it gets the attention. It is really important to us in the community, and just wanted to comment, make sure that that was going to be followed through on the actions that were handed off to city staff. Thank you very much for your time on it.
Thank you, Greg. Any other speakers, Crystal?
And there are no more speakers.
Okay, thank you. Since we did have so many public comments about our East Side item, Jeff, did you want to give a brief response on where things stand?
Sure, and our Public Works Director, Stephen Machida, can correct me if I get anything wrong, but we had a number of conversations over the last week and a half after the last council meeting at the staff level about how we'll be proceeding. We'll be reaching out to the neighborhood to conduct 1 or 2 community meetings, so we'll mail them and make sure that we get as much broad participation as we can. We'll likely try to do it, depending on how things go with COVID, as a hybrid, so that people can participate in person but also remotely, so we can get the broadest amount of attendance and participation. And so after we have those meetings, we'll be able to circle back around with the city council down the road.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Are those meetings like in the fall or late summer?
No, I think we'd like to have those as soon as possible. So probably likely in the next 6 weeks.
Okay, next 6 weeks. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, we will now move on to the consent calendar. Do any of my colleagues wish to pull an item this evening from the consent calendar? Okay, so I'm just going to note quickly, I'm going to abstain from item J, which is the Fire Station 16, because I live in close proximity. And I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
I move to approve City Council consent calendar items A through M.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Parma Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. Okay, thank you, Crystal. We will now move on to item 8, new business. Mayoral report, hearing and consideration of imposition of sanctions after Code of Conduct and Ethics investigation, City Treasurer. So I'll go ahead and open this item. Under the city's Code of Conduct and Ethics policy, when a city official is informed of a potential Code of Conduct violation, they are required to report it to the mayor and an investigation is initiated. The investigation is now complete. Tonight, as part of this hearing, we will review the results of the investigation and we will discuss the issue and potential consequences. I would like to thank our city attorney, Greg Rubens, for his assistance with the investigation, and I'm going to turn it over to him now for a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council. The Code of Conduct investigation that was undertaken included some interviews with the city treasurer, Inga Teagle, and a review of the email that was sent to the city manager, along with a later complaint that we received regarding some social media posts and a voicemail message. So I am having trouble with my report here loading. Excuse me for a second. Thank you. So it all started on April the 18th, when the initial email was sent, and then the reporting, as the mayor suggested, was brought back to the mayor by the city manager after he received the email. The investigation that we did looked into a few main issues, and many of them are spelled out in the staff report, but I'll summarize them. One of the issues was the potential FPPC violations that based upon the Form 700 that the city treasurer had filed might have been implicated. But those, after review with the city treasurer about her true ownership interest in the property, it turns out she does not have an ownership interest. She could potentially inherit 8.33%, but that's not guaranteed under the operating agreement for the LLC that owns the property and a trust estate plan. So that puts her below the threshold of having an indirect conflict of interest that might implicate the FPPC regulations. The other aspects of the investigation involve several of the provisions that are in the Code of Conduct. So they're in Section 8, Section 10, Section 11, and Section 12. I'm going to try to summarize those briefly for you, but if you have any questions, I'm glad to kind of elaborate on the findings or the likely findings, if you will. So the first one is Section 8K, which talks about avoidance of an appearance of a conflict of interest. The code section is intended to require that elected and appointed officials avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. As a member of the city treasurer likely violated this provision by presenting herself as a property owner in the area subject to the proposed moratorium that was up for consideration that was coming up for consideration on April 25th. As a member of an association representing herself as an owner of property in the area to be considered for the moratorium, she sought to influence a pending city council agenda item by communicating with the city manager using her title as city treasurer, in an effort to oppose the decision and lend credibility to her personal opposition to the issue. This created a conflict of interest, likely violating this provision. Section 8.0, excuse me, I covered the two about the FPPC. Section 10 Also, the investigation reveals that this was likely violated. City officials are admonished not to direct the city manager or city staff to initiate any action or change a course of action or prepare any report without the approval of the council. Here, the city treasurer, in sending the email, attempted to direct the city manager to provide her with information she could use to oppose the moratorium that was going to be under consideration by the council, and enlist the city manager to cooperate with her in this effort. Based on the context of the email, it appeared that a report or other documentation was going to be prepared to oppose the measure, or a presentation perhaps. Section 10X, excuse me, that's another one that was probably not violated. Section 11A was the new complaint we received at the last meeting from former Councilmember Olbert about communicating with the general public. The city treasurer likely violated this provision by communicating on Nextdoor to Mr. Olbert, a private citizen, in a form available to members of the service. The statements in the initial post were accusatory and could be interpreted as an attack on Mr. Olbert's state of mind. They also raised the implication that Mr. Olbert was not following city protocols in renting a city room. The final two are under Section 12, representing an official city position on an issue item. Use of an elected title, Section 12A, the city treasurer likely violated this provision because she used her official title as the elected city treasurer for personal reasons in an email to members of the Harbor Industrial Area and to the city manager. She also used her title in Nextdoor posts stating that the city treasurer is involved in oversight of the use of city facilities that were visible to members of the service, likely exceeding her role as a city treasurer as provided in the Code of Conduct. Finally, the city treasurer likely violated Section 12D because she shared without clarifying that the statements in the emails to the HIA members and the city manager and Nextdoor posts were her personal opinions and were not reasonably related to her duties as city treasurer. The Code of Conduct creates a right to have this report, and there is an opportunity for the interested parties to present to you their position on the accusations that are made in the report. The discipline that can be meted out under the Code of Conduct is limited. That's because the city treasurer is an elected position. The limitation that you have is to impose a sanction, and it could include a warning, formal censure, or other forms of discipline or reporting. But in this case, the other forms of discipline and reporting that are in the Code of Conduct are not applicable. A report to the grand jury. This is a local city code of conduct, so that's not an appropriate form of discipline. Because of the preliminary finding that there isn't any violation of the FPPC provisions, that a report under that to state agencies is not indicated based upon our research under this report. So finally, the sanction, if you will, is the council's decision. The council makes the decision under the Code of Conduct. It's not me, it's not the mayor, it's the council makes the decision. That's why these are in the form of likely violated, because ultimately it's your decision whether or not the code was violated. So since I'm available to answer any questions you have about my report, and or the mayor's report that I assisted her on, and if the next step would be if I see the city treasurer, Ms. Teagle's in the audience, and if she would like to make a presentation, you can hear that presentation, and then after that you can hear public comment on the agenda item, and then you can close the hearing and deliberate on your decision on the appropriate sanction.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Are there any questions for Greg from my colleagues? Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Greg, can you explain what the impact of a formal censure is to us?
Sure, thank you. That's a good question, Councilmember Collins. A censure is essentially a statement by the entire council. It requires a majority vote that the conduct was inappropriate, and a censure is a form of reprimand, and that censure becomes part of the public record, so it would be something that would be in your minutes, and it would show why you did what you did and why you meted out the sanction if that's the decision the council makes.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this? Oh, Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I'm glad Ms. Teagle's here this evening. I look forward to hearing from her. My question, Greg, is did Ms. Teagle provide any formal response to these allegations in a written form? I didn't see anything like that in the packet.
No, we did not receive written communication, but there was, she did meet with me on one occasion and then met with staff on another occasion to explain her position.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see no other questions. At this point, would City Treasurer Teagle like to come up and speak? Okay, please proceed.
Madam Mayor and City Council, first of all, thank you for allowing me time to speak on this issue. I really appreciate having the opportunity to explain some of the errors in judgment that occurred. And I also want to say that I very much apologize to Madam Mayor, the City Council, and staff for putting all of you in this position. It was never my intent. And sometimes we make mistakes. So I deeply regret having sent an email to 3 members of the HIA and then on to the city manager. I realized it was an emotional response, not well thought out, and I want to apologize for sending it in the first place. I realize that it's not the role of the city treasurer to try to influence or control policy decisions, as that is clearly the role of the mayor and the city council. Unfortunately, in hindsight, it was clearly an error in judgment. As people, we've all made, at some point or another, made mistakes, and especially ones that we wish that we could kind of rewind time. Unfortunately, a mistake was made. I also wanted to extend my apologies to Mark Olbert. I don't see him here, but I will reach out to him as well. If he felt that my interaction with him was in any way demeaning or an attack on his character. That wasn't certainly not my intent when interacting with him on Nextdoor or by voicemail. I would like to end by saying that I take the code of conduct and the ethics policy very seriously. In fact, I was one of the original authors of the document back in, I believe, 2005. With over 20 years combined as an appointed or elected official, starting with EDAC and then Planning Commission, then City Council, and now Treasurer, you know, I've been serving the citizens of San Carlos, and I've always tried to hold myself to the highest standards of ethics in everything I've done. In conclusion, I sincerely hope that Madam Mayor McDowell and the other members of the City Council understand that it was never my intention in any way to violate the Code of Conduct and Ethics. I'm very sorry to have been the one to cause this item this evening, and hope that you will consider my long-term commitment to the San Carlos citizens and these comments in your discussion. Thank you again for your time and understanding.
Thank you. Greg, if council members have any questions for the city treasurer, would they ask them now?
Yeah, that would be appropriate. It's considered a hearing and testimony is allowed, and you can ask clarifying questions.
Are there any clarifying questions from my colleagues this evening? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to, Greg, the next part is public comment, correct? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. This is for this agenda item only at this time.
I don't see any hands raised in the audience today, and there are no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. We will now move to council discussion, and I see Councilmember Collins, your hand is ready.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Inga, for your comments. I've known you a long time, and anyone who's been in this town for as long as I have eventually ends up in a position like this. And it's not comfortable. It's not something that we ever wish for, but it happened. But we as elected officials work for the residents of San Carlos. Our job is to make decisions that benefit our neighbors by providing services and amenities that make their lives better. The council passed a moratorium on development in the HIA area to allow thoughtful consideration of an area that has many possibilities for industry, housing, and recreation. This is the last part of town in which this can be done. And over the last 25 years, our councils have favored assertive commercial development as it brought much needed revenue to the city without the imposition of additional taxes on our residents. We favored a moratorium this time in order to systematically plan a future that might include more housing and recreational opportunities that will benefit current and future residents. We understand that some of commercial interests may be impacted, but as elected officials, we must consider the greatest good of the community without regard to our personal interests. It seems that the treasurer's goal was to protect her own financial interests. She stated that she was an owner of property in the HIA that might be negatively impacted by our vote to impose a development moratorium. That turned out not to be true, but she also led everyone in the HIA to believe she was an owner as well. All of us in local government are required to take an ethics refresher course every 2 years. Each time I take that course, I'm reminded that honesty, ethical behavior, and proper conduct are expected of city officials. The acts of the city treasurer not only undermine the integrity of the position, they taint all of us. We do not use our titles for personal gain. We do not tell the city manager to influence council members on how to vote. We do not abuse members of the public in any way, in public or on social media. And we don't misrepresent ourselves in correspondence with anyone. We have a responsibility to honor the public trust that has been granted to us by the voters. We violate it at our own peril. Now, while the strongest action we as a council can take in this case is a formal censure, and which I will support, I personally believe that the treasurer should resign. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. I'm wondering, actually, Greg, before we move forward, should I close the public hearing before we continue to deliberate?
This is sort of a hybrid type of a public hearing, but it wouldn't hurt for the record to have a formal motion to close the testimony portion.
Okay, is there a motion?
I move to close the public hearing.
I'll second that.
Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Rack,
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan,
Yes.
Councilmember Collins,
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan,
Yes.
and Mayor McDowell.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Ron, for your comments. Looking for further discussion at this point. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief. So first off, I want to thank the mayor, the city manager, and city attorney for your leadership on this issue. I appreciate Treasurer Inga Teagle coming today and issuing an apology to the community. It's, from my perspective, I appreciate how much work it goes in to earn the trust of the community and how quickly that trust can be eroded. As a community member of San Carlos, I feel a loss of that trust. I'm disappointed that prudent actions weren't taken when this revelation of the potential moratorium was presented. And I'm worried that this will erode the public's confidence in all of us. I just have deep concerns about that. So I would be, curious to hear what the rest of council favors in terms of next steps that we take on this particular matter. So thank you.
Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, it's an unfortunate incident. I appreciate Treasurer Teagle has come before us and issued an apology and understands the gravity of the situation. There's nothing ambiguous about the facts here. It's it's all written down, all in email form in the public record, and clear violations of several provisions of our code of conduct. I certainly would support a public censure this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Vice Mayor Beck.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I just want to, so obviously we go into, coming here is not the issues that we want to be dealing with and talking about today, but it's what's here before us. So I appreciate the Treasurer's apology and thank you for sharing that. But as others on the dais have said, public trust is critical for us to be able to be successful in our roles. And so as difficult this situation is, I will be voting to support censure as well.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I will chime in at this point. Thank you, Treasurer Teagle, for coming tonight, and I appreciate your apology. I agree with my colleagues that public service depends on public trust, and when there are questions about public duties mixing with personal interests, then that trust can be put in jeopardy. As John mentioned, there's several examples, including influencing the city manager, using the official title for personal reasons, the appearance of a conflict of interest. And it appears based on the findings of the investigation that the city treasurer violated 5 sections of the code of conduct, which is quite a few at this point. So I too will be supporting censure this evening. I'm wondering if any other colleagues would like to discuss next steps. Councilmember Parmer-Lohan.
Yeah, well, just for the record, I just want to also acknowledge my observation that 5 of the codes of conduct were violated in this case, and I just wanted that to go on record.
Madam Mayor, I have a suggestion. If there's a motion to make findings that particular sections were violated, the maker of the motion should specify the sections, and they're outlined in the staff report which sections you believe are violated, and then include in the motion the sanction that's proposed for approval by the council.
Okay, do any of my colleagues feel ready to make a motion?
Madam Mayor, I'll move that Treasurer Inga, it's a finding of our council that Treasurer Inga violated Section 12A, Section 12D, Section 8K, and Section 10V of our Code of Conduct, and I further move for formal censure for these actions.
Councilmember Dugan, would you like to amend that to include 11A?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I will amend that to include Section 11A.
Greg, is that acceptable as a motion?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Farmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. Okay. I didn't ask for further comments, but I assume everybody got their comments spoken. Okay. All right, thank you. We will now move to public hearing, item 9A. Consideration of adopting a resolution approving the placement of past due balances for sidewalk repairs on the county property tax bill pursuant to section 12.04.030 of the San Carlos Municipal Code. Good evening, Director Machida.
Stephen Machida, Public Works Director. Before I get started with the presentation, I just want to give you, the council, an update on some of the data in the report. Actually, some of the report actually has been updated as a result of last Friday. There still remains 455 property owners that had outstanding bills, of which of the 455, 432 actually, as of last Friday, paid, or so they no longer have their outstanding bills. That leaves a remainder of 23 properties that still have their outstanding. So in the resolution in your packet, as well as Exhibit A in your packet, those are the updated numbers that are going to be presenting tonight. So with that, I'll get started on the presentation. So this is in regards to the sidewalk repair program. So the municipal code requires that property owners are responsible for the maintenance and repair of the sidewalks across their property frontage. As council is well aware, the sidewalk repair program actually assists the property owners with the financial burden of the sidewalk repair. So the program allows the repair of the cost of the repair shared equally between the city and the property owners. And as I mentioned earlier, the most recent project completed 455 properties. So as the repairs are actually completed, each of the property owners are invoiced. So the final notices were sent on March 1st and May 3rd. The property owners were notified that any unpaid balances would be added to their property tax bills. And then, as I've mentioned earlier, as of today, 23 property owners still have unpaid balances. So the municipal code 12.04.030, actually the cost and expenditure may be placed on the county's property tax bill for the benefit of the city. The city clerk shall notify the property owners of the intent to place the costs of the repairs on the county tax bills. And this was done on May 13th. The property owners, as part of the notice, were given the opportunity to appear before City Council tonight to show cause why the repairs or the cost should not be placed on the tax bill. And they were also informed that any unpaid balances are to be placed on the tax bill for collection for past due balances. So what's before council tonight is to approve the placement of the 23 properties or unpaid balances on sidewalk repairs on the county tax roll. Do not approve the placement on the tax roll, or then provide other direction to city staff. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen this evening? Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Stephen. Appreciate the rundown on that. My only question is it typical for cities not to charge any sort of past due fee or penalties associated with past due payments like this? I noticed that we have not charged any fees or penalties of any kind at this point.
Well, I think we have tried to work with the residents just so that we could actually complete the project. We do have an agreement. We do have an agreement with the property owners actually that they agreed to pay. So we go through the process hoping that they pay, but unfortunately if they don't, then the only remedy is actually put the unpaid balances on their tax roll.
Understood, but just to be clear, we're passing this on to the tax roll with no fees or penalties associated with these past due amounts?
That's correct. I believe there is a small fee that the county will pass through onto the tax roll. It's very, very nominal.
Okay, well, I mean like $10, $12, something like that. Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Stephen, you said that there were 23 properties outstanding, and our staff report says 30. So those 7 paid. I don't think I heard what the remaining balance was out of that 33,000.
The remaining balances are actually in your Exhibit A, and I believe it's $23,533.87.
Okay. All right. That's all I had. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll open it up to public comment.
There are no hands raised in the audience in the chambers and no hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you, Crystal. Any discussion on this item this evening?
Do we need a motion to close the public hearing?
Oh, sure. That would be great.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. All right. Any discussion now? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2022-54,
54.
resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving the placement of past due balances for sidewalk repairs on the county property tax roll pursuant to Section 12.04.030 of the San Carlos Municipal Code.
I'll second that.
Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. We will now move on to item 9B, consideration of adopting an interim ordinance pursuant to Government Code Section 65858B, extending a moratorium on the submission, consideration, or approval of applications for lot line adjustments, subdivisions, discretionary land use approvals, or building permits necessary for development within the northeast area of the City of San Carlos, subject to certain enumerated exceptions. And we have Megan with us this evening. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. Before you this evening is the consideration of extending and modifying the ordinance which established a development moratorium for the Northeast area. There we go. For my presentation this evening, I will provide a brief background and overview of staff's work on this project since the moratorium went into effect on April 25th. Then I'll review the options before you this evening and provide our staff recommendations. During the council meeting on April 25th, the City Council adopted the interim moratorium, which enacted the development agreement for the Northeast area. The moratorium is in effect for an initial 45 days. During the April 25th meeting, the council asked that city staff both further refine what the moratorium does and does not allow, and gather additional stakeholder input. I'm before you tonight with updates on both items. As a reminder, before council this evening is the consideration of both extending the ordinance for an additional 22 months and 15 days and modifications to the ordinance. For a refresher, the moratorium boundary is the northeast area, as illustrated on this map. The boundary does not include the nearby single-family neighborhood or the Palo Alto Medical Foundation site, because this site already has an approved development agreement and a 10-year planned development plan. Also, as a reminder, the purpose of the moratorium is to provide time to prepare a specific plan for the area. So this area was previously annexed into the City of San Carlos city limits in 1997. And since that time, there has been very little change in the land use regulations. Recently, there's been a lot of interest in redeveloping property throughout the area, especially from the life science and biotechnology sectors. Therefore, this specific plan would really provide a roadmap for future development of the area. Staff anticipates starting this specific plan process over the summer, and specific plan processes typically take about 2 years. The specific plan will also explore the possibility of introducing housing in the area. And as a part of this, we need to fully understand the presence of any hazardous substances and any impact this may have on all future developments and future uses. The moratorium will also allow time to create a plan to address flooding along Belmont Creek, which has been a substantial issue for many businesses, and will provide time to prepare the general plan and EIR amendments, which will be needed since citywide we are on a trajectory to exceed the industrial, commercial, and office build-out approved by the 2030 general plan. This moratorium would also provide time to ensure that the proposed development aligns with the council and community's vision for the area, as will be defined throughout our specific plan process. So during your meeting on April 25th, as mentioned, the council asked staff to gather additional stakeholder input on the moratorium. So since we were before you last, we've presented at the Harbor Industrial Association luncheon, which was attended by over 30 property owners, developers, and other interested parties. We also met individually with numerous property and business owners. We held a public meeting on May 11th, which was attended by over 30 attendees, and we sent letters directly to all business and property owners, inviting them to join us during this meeting. We've responded to numerous email and phone call inquiries, and we posted updates on the city's website. So, together with all of this information, as well as staff expertise and general legal counsel expertise, we've refined the moratorium text and prepared 3 options for the council's consideration. So what we heard during our meetings with the stakeholders, we heard common themes throughout the conversations. First, there's an interest in allowing for exterior improvements, and this is currently allowed by all the options before you. I think I may take my mask off. I feel a little, if I may, I haven't presented live in 2 years. I'm also pregnant, so I'm sorry I'm bringing humanity into this, but whew, you gotta get back in the flow, don't you? Okay. So first, what we heard that there's really an interest in allowing for interior improvements. That's already allowed by all the options that we have before you tonight. Second, there's also an interest in allowing for exterior improvements, and we propose this in option 3, also before you this evening. There's also an interest in allowing for the ordinary maintenance and upkeep of properties, what would go on naturally, normally, and this is proposed in all 3 options. We also heard an interest in allowing for conditional use permits, and this option we did not recommend in allowing for conditional use permits because they run with perpetuity of the land, and that might not align with the vision of the specific plan. Sorry. We also want to highlight that we did allow for minor modifications to existing conditional use permits, and that business as usual can operate. So any use that is allowed, permitted by right, can move forward. And lastly, all options include the submission and consideration of applications, although of course not the approval of applications. So, the intent of the moratorium is not to issue any permits for development that would change the land use of a property or allow for major changes that may not align with the forthcoming specific plan. We also are cognizant that any development that moves forward now may not be required to implement any possible improvements outlined in the specific plan, nor implement any of the community benefits that may be negotiated as a part of the plan. So therefore, the moratorium does not allow for the approval of applications that would first of all significantly change the land use or allow redevelopments that are not in alignment with the possible specific plan improvements and recommendations. So as I mentioned earlier, staff has prepared 3 options for modifications to the moratorium, and these are before you for your consideration this evening. These are based on stakeholder input, city staff, and general counsel's expertise. And I will walk through these options now. So option 1 includes general revisions to the ordinance. All of these revisions really allow for greater flexibility under the moratorium while still prohibiting new development and large investments that may not be in alignment with the specific plan. These revisions extend the moratorium for 22 months and 15 days, removes text that prohibits the submission and consideration of applications, and this is to be in conformance with California law. So per the legal case Building Industry Legal Defense Foundation versus Superior Court, the city must continue to process applications even when a moratorium is in place, although of course we're not required to approve the applications. This also introduces a new Section 5, Request for Relief, which provides applicants with an avenue to submit an application to the city to obtain relief from the moratorium if the applicant contends that the ordinance is somehow unlawful. We also changed the term tenant improvements to be interior improvements in response to questions that Council had during our April 25th meeting, and also to be more encompassing. We also recommend expanding the list of exemptions, and some examples include allowing for sign permits, solar panels, and minor modifications to existing CUPs to allow for increases in the hours of operation and that, etc., that kind of thing. Our intent is to really continue to allow businesses to operate as usual and not get in the way of the everyday operation of this many successful businesses in the area. Option 2 builds upon option 1 and includes the same revisions that are presented in option 1. Option 2 also exempts the planning permits sought by PG&E for a 50,000 square foot addition for operations and customer service. So this essentially exempts an application on property controlled by a state-regulated public utility. This is the option that staff recommends, option 2. Option 3, or the last option before you, includes revisions proposed in option 1, which carry forward to option 2, also includes the PG&E exemption. And this option also exempts applications for exterior or facade improvements which do not involve the addition of floor area. So for some background on this option, city staff met with Graymark Capital, which is a new property and business owner at 150 Industrial Road. And we also met with CellLink, which is an existing business at 610 Quarry Road. Both businesses expressed an interest in submitting applications for exterior improvements. And these exterior improvements are on rather large parcels with large footprints, large buildings, and would involve significant changes. So while we appreciate the investment in both the properties and the businesses, these exterior improvements could really represent a large financial investment, and we're concerned that with this large financial investment, property owners may be disincentivized to implement changes in the future that align with the specific plan. So at this time, staff does not recommend this option. So in summary, staff's recommendation is that the City Council extend the ordinance enacted on April 25th for an additional 22 months and 15 days, and that the Council modify the ordinance pursuant to option 2. So this completes my presentation, and we're available for questions.
Thank you, Megan. You did a great job, and I thought it was really very kind that not one but 2 of our staff members brought you water. So that's very City of San Carlos, I think. So are there any questions for Megan this evening after her terrific presentation? Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Megan. Great report. And I don't know when you're due, but my daughter's due in August, so I'll introduce your children at some point. Just briefly, just a couple of questions. You said that there was a presentation made to the HIA.
That's right.
What was the reception like?
To be honest, it was I would say straightforward. There were some great questions asked by the audience, and we have a summary of those that we could provide you, mainly logistical clarification questions. They expressed concern about flooding along Belmont Creek, curiosity about what the specific plan would include. Would it include considerations of heights and densities? But mostly clarification questions, kind of procedural.
And did they seem okay with some of the proposed revisions to the ordinance?
At that time, the three
yet.
options. That's right. At that time, we had not yet developed the three options, so I would have to reserve my opinion on that. Yes.
Fair enough. And then my second question is, will this? I realize what this whole concept is that we're trying to do, but I'm wondering if it allows for city-specified non-housing and non-commercial uses, such as like a public recreational facility. Can we? Is that going to be part of what we do?
Well, it can definitely be on the table for consideration as a part of the specific plan. Is that yes? So we have not yet really gotten the ball rolling on the specific plan process, but. Exploring all these options are all on the table. So no, as you know, no decisions have yet been made, but we are interested in pursuing what the area could be. Some uses may have a home in the area while others may not, and that may be dependent on community feedback. It may also be dependent on the environmental reports that we receive after going through that process.
Okay, well, I'll make my wishes known then as we proceed. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. I was reminded, does anyone have any disclosures they'd like to speak about before we continue with questions? Councilmember Palmer-Lohan.
Thank you. Just out of an abundance of caution, I just want to run through my disclosures. FPPC advice letter number A20.111 allows me to participate in tonight's discussion. My consultancy practice has never done any business with the city or with the businesses that have applications before the city. I've toured the Alexandria real estate property on the 800 block of Industrial Road and the MBC building on Britain. In the past, I've taken meetings with Premia, Princeton, Presidio Bay, spoken with a rep for Black Mountain Properties in Sobrato. I've met with the Mincroft Group that has a property at 200 Industrial at Quarry. My decisions this evening will not be influenced by those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan. And I will just chime in that I have met with several of the developers that you mentioned as well, except for MBC. So any other disclosures? Councilmember Dugan and then Vice Mayor Rack.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I previously disclosed who I've met with by way of developers and owners in that area, and I have not had any further meetings since the last time this was on the agenda. Thank you.
I also disclosed last time, and I have not had any further meetings at this time.
Councilmember Collins?
Yeah, the only one I can remember was Presidio Partners, and that was a while back. So,
as were mine. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We will continue with questions. Councilmember Dugan, I believe you had your signal on. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Appreciate that. And thank you, Megan. Good overview. And I'm glad about the outreach that we performed, and I'm glad about this list of exemptions we've developed from this moratorium. Obviously, a moratorium is a strong action for a city to take, so I'm glad we've made some good strides here to be reasonable and accommodating, well, meeting our objective of making sure any wholesale redevelopment in this area would ultimately be consistent with our general plan. That's what we're driving for here. My only concern and my question is the list of exemptions, although it's a good list, and I think it will include most of what is, driving a lot of concern over there right now. I'm just concerned there's something we're not thinking of or aware of at this point. So the request for relief, I like that notion that if something unexpected comes up and we haven't already thought about an exemption, is there still a chance for us to be reasonable? And I was just, I guess, a little surprised that the standard we're using for an applicant to request for relief if they don't otherwise fall into one of these exemptions, is that the moratorium in their case is unlawful. And I guess that's what I just want to understand. Did you consider any other standards for request for relief beyond unlawful? That just seems like a very, very high bar to put on a chance for us to be reasonable.
Greg, may I defer that to you, to the city attorney?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this, our office believes that that's the most appropriate way, a method of reviewing a decision that might be adverse to a property owner. For the purposes of the interim ordinance, another standard, that I've seen in other ordinances like hardship or other things, it's very hard to evaluate those types of things, and you might end up in a situation where you couldn't even-handedly apply those standards, or you'd be asking for a great deal of information. It would be burdensome on staff and the city to evaluate those types of hardship type claims. So we felt the best approach would be, if there are any potential claims out there that there's something about the moratorium and the interim ordinance that is unlawful or unconstitutional, that we would provide an avenue for people to assert that to you. Or first to staff and then to you, and then if after evaluating the particular facts and circumstances of that application, we feel that there's an issue there, we could bring it back to you and address it then, rather than try to create a mechanism that would probably be a little self-defeating too for the purposes. If we had exceptions, they can swallow the rule, if you will. If you make it too liberal, you'd be getting a lot of requests for exceptions, and we didn't think that was consistent with your intent and the purpose of the moratorium. Okay, thank you. So if a category of relief comes about and we feel like further exceptions should be made, can we amend this moratorium, say 12 months from now, in the middle of the 22-month course? I think it would be remedial in that sense. I mean, if there was some remedy that we felt like we had missed something, there'd be a way to do that. I defer to my partner on that question, but I think that we're amending it now, so it makes sense that we should be able to amend it during the course of the urgency ordinance as it comes forward to you. Okay, thank you. And then final question, is there any particular flavor or category of unlawful aspects that you think could come around, or that's just what we decided to use? We don't foresee anything in particular? I think that's a good statement. We don't foresee any problems with the way we drafted this. I think it's a way to help evaluate if there is a claim. It creates a process for us to evaluate it, so people don't have to go directly to court. I mean, they can actually talk with us about it, and we can consider it. Every one of these would be. I'm sure you're probably aware of the phrase, but it's going to be a fact-based legal analysis on each case. Each property is going to be unique, and we can't predict every particular circumstance, so we would want to have a chance to evaluate that. Okay. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you. So I noted that one of the things you're not recommending would be exterior improvements. So could you touched on it a little bit during your presentation. Could you talk a little bit more about the rationale behind that, where interior build-outs would be allowed, exterior improvements would not?
That's right. That's right. So our thinking is that many of the conversations that we've had around exterior improvements are not small scale. So the small scale improvements are allowed by ordinary maintenance and upkeep. I think we use the term for public health maintenance and safety. Those could move forward. The exterior improvements that kind of fall under this category are very large scale. They're reskinning entire buildings, and they're substantial investments, so could be in the millions of dollars. And so our concern is that if a property owner puts that type of investment in their property, that they may not 2 years, 3 years down the line be interested in redeveloping the site, that that better aligns with the specific plan, the recommendations from the specific plan. The thought about the tenant improvements is that interior improvements often aren't as costly, and the interior improvements aren't adding to the square footage of the property. Although to be fair, the exterior improvements, only the ones that would be allowed to move forward in option 3, also could not add to the square footage of the building. But we do want to support the businesses that are there. We do want businesses that are permitted by right to be able to move in, to flourish. And so that is why we're recommending the interior improvements, because that can allow businesses to move forward with business as usual, if you will.
Thank you. And then I noted that staff is recommending option 2, and which includes option 1 revisions and then exempts planning permit sought by PG&E. Could you talk a little bit more about the idea there and what's the rationale behind that aspect of it, the PG&E piece?
Sure. So with the PG&E piece, we recommend exemption of the specific planning permit that is before us today. So just to caveat that, we do outline that in the staff report, but it wouldn't be any application that came forward from PG&E moving forward. It's the specific one that we are reviewing today. And our thought process is that it's unlikely that that property will change hands in the near future. For these other parcels, we are seeing property owners selling. We're seeing consolidation, but PG&E is likely to remain there for many years, if not decades to come. And so this improvement is really enhancing their operations and customer service. And so that is why we proposed that as a part of option 2. I will defer to the city manager if you wanted to add anything about the PG&E exemption and our recommendation to exempt PG&E.
I think the only thing that I would add, you did a great job covering it, was it seemed that we got some indication from the council at the last meeting that there was interest in considering that item tonight.
That's right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Megan, for the presentation. I had 3 questions. Number 1, there's also, I believe, one project that's been recently approved, right? So that's covered on, that wouldn't be part of the moratorium. That project's been deemed complete, right? So that would be exempted. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's a project at 642 Quarry, and it was deemed complete prior to the April 25th meeting. And so you're correct that it is able to move forward.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, could you clarify a little bit on why we would allow tree removal as part of number 2? Is it specific to a dead tree, or I don't understand, if we're not allowing improvements, why we would permit tree removals of protected trees?
That's right. That is an exemption that we recommend, is the tree removal. And so I think our thought process is sort of building on the PG&E similar, is I believe that we heard interest in this item from council during the April 25th meeting. It also falls under the ordinary maintenance and repair of landscaping. So if we have a tree out there that is large and could represent a public health hazard or public safety hazard, excuse me, we would want to remove it. If it's protected, we do have to have a permit in order to remove the tree. And so our thinking is that we want to allow the ordinary maintenance to move forward, and the tree permit would fall under that.
And is that something, and maybe this might be a question for Greg, or not, can we, I guess I'm struggling with that because I would like a little more clarification. We just went through a large process to redo our protected tree ordinance, and it seems to me the way this is presented, we're not sort of, we might be rolling things back a little bit on this. I don't see for general landscaping why we would remove a protected tree. I could see if the tree's dead and a health hazard potentially, but is that something we could clarify?
Yeah, I think I can answer the question this way, Councilmember Rack, that this urgency ordinance, the exemption, I think, just defaults to our tree ordinance. So the tree ordinance you just enacted is going to apply to this area of town universally. So the exemption doesn't create a new rule for this area. It just defaults to the city's ordinances on tree removal.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And then my last question, Megan, is, do we feel like what's being covered in here has any sort of application or exemption in the case of sort of a natural disaster? I mean, if we had significant flooding, let's say at Belmont Creek, and it created some sort of, and maybe it's covered by the public health aspect that you talked about. Is that clarified, or there was a fire in a building or something happened that was out of the control of the property owner or business? Do we feel like I wouldn't want to sort of limit somebody from sort of doing those repairs and maybe doing the maintenance or work that needed to happen in those kind of cases?
It's an excellent question. City Attorney, would you have a take on that?
It's an interesting hypothetical, and anything can happen with the way our world has been going lately. I think that would be one of a question that I don't know if it's covered in our ordinance. That specific question, I don't know if we have an exemption for a catastrophic destruction of a building or something of that nature. It may fall under the general exception of if it's there's a hardship because they couldn't rebuild something and they'd lose the productive use of the property. But it certainly would be, if they wanted to make it bigger than it was, then the moratorium would cover it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That'd be my response, is that a failure or a natural disaster, they could rebuild what they had if that's what they wanted to do, but they may want to wait to see what plays out before they rebuild too.
But sort of the basic sort of rebuilding to that point would be covered would be permitted under this, on your reading of the ordinance. I
believe it would under the exception. They would have to apply for an exception, but it seems to me that is a situation where someone's wanting to rebuild to what it was before, that's a status quo. But I don't want to make that the definitive answer to the question, because again, situations are unique, and I'd want to look at that as if something like that were to come up.
And do you feel like there needs to be some sort of clarification on that? That might be,
I think we'd be better off just waiting to see if, I hate to say that, let's put it a different way. If we come to a situation like that, I think we can be nimble enough to respond to a situation, because I have a feeling it wouldn't be one property. It might be a declaration of emergency. There might be all kinds of things that could happen that would mitigate against something like that we could deal with.
Great. Thank you. That's all the questions I had. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Adam. I had that question too. That's a good question. I have one question for you, Megan. So I note that part of the revisions allows the city to continue to consider applications. How are we managing the expectations of developers who are putting plans forward while we're also considering this big plan that could change land use?
That's an excellent question, and one that we've been talking about internally a lot as well. So you're right that legally we do have to accept applications, and we also have to consider them, which means we have to review them. However, our plan is, if this happens, would be to be quite upfront with developers and say, we are going through this process. Even if we review your application, we may not be able to approve it at the end of the moratorium period, because it may not be in alignment with the land use regulations at that time, with the specific plan that we're working on. So it would be a risk for developers if they did move forward with applications, and we would just have to be quite fair with them, with the sort of no surprises policy, that they could go through this whole process and it could be a waste of time and potentially money at the end of it. So our plan, as I said, is just to be quite straightforward with them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing no questions at this time, we'll go ahead and move to public comment. We will take comments from members of the public in person first, and then we will take comments by Zoom. And this is specifically on the agenda item of Northeast Area Moratorium Extension.
We do have a member of the public in person who has submitted a speaker slip, Brian Heckman. If you can approach the podium, please.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Brian Heckman, a principal at Graymark Capital. Graymark purchased 150 Industrial in 2019. It's a 230,000 square foot life science GMP facility in this area. In February of 2022, our tenant of 25 years downsized their operations and moved to another market. Our project envisions maintaining the existing life sciences use, but upgrading the building as it hasn't been updated in 25 years. The project has incredible existing infrastructure for research, including significant power, existing chemistry and biology lab build-out, pharmaceutical grade water, and FDA-approved clean room space. Upwards of $80 million has been spent by our tenant and landlord for this infrastructure. We will be completing interior improvements, which is allowed, as we understand, by the proposed moratorium. However, to attract a strong tenant, we need to refresh our exterior to address California Title 24 energy codes. Some windows are single pane. Update the courtyard to address flooding issues and refresh planting and heaving painting, and aesthetically improve the property. As I said, we will not be adding additional square footage. We will be maintaining the existing use of the property. We cannot afford to keep our 230,000 square foot property vacant for 2 years or more. And the site coverage and value of the existing infrastructure, we believe, is going to preclude us from redeveloping the property in the future. And we believe the community would benefit by us completing the exterior renovation, improving the aesthetics of the property, because we are going to need to go forward with this work regardless, and we will not be redeveloping the property. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Crystal, do we have any other members of the public in person?
Yes, looks like we do have one. If you can please approach the podium and state your name, please.
So, sir, could you please speak into the microphone and start there? Thank you.
Mark Lockenmeyer with the Harbor Industrial Association. We sent a letter to City Council a couple days ago, so I hope you all were able to look at it. Didn't want to get too much into the weeds, but just wanted to kind of elaborate. One of the concerns we have is because of the moratorium, there may be projects approved south of Holly, and we're concerned that that type of density will fill up some of the space that we could possibly do north of Holly. We don't know if we were taking that into consideration or not. So I know that when you do your specific plan, there'll be some EIRs, you'll have traffic counts and things like that. You'll see what's kind of south of Holly and what's north. And we don't want to be penalized that a bunch of projects try to get in first south of Holly, which precludes the property owners north of Holly from getting projects done. Okay. The second thing is you're considering the residential. And one of the tricky things with residential is the environmental component of what's under the ground. And industrial standards are much more lax than residential standards. So when you're thinking of a potential area, you're going to have to find out or do some type of studies of how contaminated it might be. There may be properties that are very contaminated and other ones that are not. And a lot of times somebody that may have contamination doesn't want to do studies because once you find out you've got a problem, and you got to start fixing it. And usually that's a lot of testing, years and years of testing. And I don't know if you'll be able to have people, if you decide to go with a residential area, start doing some phase 2 testing to see if it's possible to do it. And a lot of times you'll have restrictions, like on the new Honda dealership. That site has restrictions. You can't do certain things, like 2/3 or 1/3 of the land can't be built on. So these are going to be like tricky issues you're going to have to look at if you decide to go residential in certain areas. And you're going to have some environmental consultants talk to you about that and how you're going to be able to navigate that.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your comments. Any other members of the public?
My name is Rick LaFranchi. I'm also a principal at Graymark Capital.
I thought it might be useful just to provide a little bit more color on our plans. Generally speaking, when it comes to the exterior facade treatments we have planned, it's really just to the front of the building, and it's really floating some glass and adding some glass. We aren't reskinning the whole building by any means, and I think the spend that we're looking at for that facade treatment is in the $4 to $5 million neighborhood. When you take into account the interior plans that we have, that capital expenditure will be upwards of 60. So, that's market tenant improvement allowance in addition to dollars that we would spend to, clean up the space a little bit. So in the grand scheme, the facade treatment will just allow us to aesthetically improve it. But when it comes to the actual CapEx, it's a small fraction of it. I just thought that might be useful for the council. Thank you.
Madam, can I just get one? Sorry.
Sure.
Can you? Or 45.
425.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, are there any other members of the public here in person that would wish to speak? Okay, seeing none. Crystal, is anyone waiting on Zoom?
Yes, we do have one hand up on Zoom. Kevin Coakley, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Yeah, I'm Kevin Coakley. I'm from CellLink Corporation at 610 Quarry Road. For those of you that don't know about us, which is probably most of you, we operate a clean manufacturing business of critical components for electric vehicles. We offer a path for technical and operational growth to many blue-collar workers here that have little formal education or training. We've also hired several graduates of Carlmont High School as interns and engineers. So in summary, I think we feel that we provide a strong net benefit to the city. We're a tenant here at 610 Quarry Road, and we have an option to stay in the building until 2031. For it to make sense for us to stay, though, we would really like to be able to improve the outside appearance of the building. I think similar to the prior gentleman, we're looking to do something like a facade, not make permanent kind of structural changes to the outside. But this is a really big deal to us because we have customers coming from places ranging from Michigan to Munich, and the building at present is an eyesore, and it kind of dissuades folks from wanting to work with us. So, we wanted to kind of make a strong request that the council make an allowance for tenant improvements on the inside and outside of the buildings without increasing the footprint. Last thing I'll say is that this is one of the last light manufacturing areas left between San Mateo and Redwood City. And if the moratorium locks us into a dilapidated building, we actually don't really know where else we can go. So we love it here, and we appreciate the council's consideration of being able to make this type of improvement.
Thank you, Kevin.
And there are no further hands.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to close the public hearing at this time? Oh, go ahead.
Can I ask one follow-up question before we do that? If that's okay. Can you just, Megan, I don't know, or can clarify? So I understand what we're recommending on sort of the three different options. And I understand by law we have to allow the applications to come in. We don't necessarily have to process them as quickly or as we have to. But are we talking about sort of if we get through this 2-year period, or if we just get through the specific plan sooner, how fast is the process at that point? Because if someone has gone ahead and submitted the application, they're not starting from zero. They may be at a point that we could say, hey, this is a 1-month thing or 2 months. Can you clarify, kind of understands what that would look like?
Yes, I'm going to defer to the Community Development Director for this question.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, thank you, Mayor and council members. So the only thing that would be, and it really depends on a number of different things. I would say from the beginning, it would be the same process that we do now. So if somebody wanted a plan development permit, it would, it takes so long. So that's like the baseline. I would say that it wouldn't necessarily be sped up unless we do certain things. We consciously do an EIR that covers all new development in the specific plan, and we give it a build out number, and we say, if you can do this as long as you build up to that number, and there is streamlining then built into the plan. It actually, could save a developer hundreds of thousands of dollars in a year at a time if it's done correctly. So where a developer might take a year and a half to get through the process, it could be a 9-month process or something like that. So there are provisions that you can build into your specific plan to speed things up.
So once that plan is sort of approved and finalized, that would be the case. And if the case of some of the items that were raised sort of about the sort of facade improvements and things like that, sort of let's say we fast forward, we decided to go with option 2, and they maybe had that in the queue and it was sort of permitted under the new specific plan. Is that an even faster process because we're only talking about some exterior upgrades?
Yes. Yeah, today it's a pretty quick process. So, I mean, if you chose option 3, we could get them through the process. And our regular process is actually quite fast.
Got it. Thank you, Al.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. So I'm not sure if this is for Megan or Al, but I just wanted to kind of circle back around too on the exterior improvements. And I certainly appreciate that there's a number of square foot coming online in the Bay Area for biotech, and attracting and retaining staff is, important. And I appreciate the caller's comments with respect to presentation to potential customers. So what I'm wondering about here is who's taking the risk of making those improvements? Is the city somewhat responsible if we allow facade improvements to go forward, or is it squarely on the business owner or tenant who's making those changes? Because what I'm trying to reconcile is if we would allow, I heard a value stated before that I appreciated, which was around allowing the businesses to continue to operate while we go through this process. And I'm also hearing from some of the business owners that there's a concern about operability and not being able to make some of these exterior improvements. So I'm just trying to understand kind of that potential path forward and, really what's at stake and what are the risks here.
Well, I think that, we want to help our businesses. We're a business-friendly community, so both the property owners and business owners have made a compelling case, right? So I would think that if we allowed them to move forward with the exterior improvements, it's not a risk for them. We're allowing them to do that. It's good. What they're saying is that it's good for them, and that's good. But in terms of the specific plan, I guess that's it's a more difficult argument. What we've heard from Greystar is they have a very large footprint. They're going to invest millions and millions into the interior of the building. So if I'm going to wear my economist hat for a minute, I would say they're not going anywhere for a while, and that building is unlikely to change in the next decade. They may. If the specific plan offers an incentive for that owner to develop because of the characteristics of the plan are just so compelling economically, well, maybe they'll decide to do something. So when a city does this kind of thing, the risk to the city is if it is a huge parcel, 8, 9, 10 acres or something out of 100 acres, 10%. Well, then that kind of locks in that 10% for the next decade. And if you really want to see some change there, you have to reconcile that. So if a couple of businesses have compelling arguments for the next 2 years, it means a lot to them. That is why we put that option before you this evening. Otherwise, and we did hear that there was some interest in doing that. So it's not an easy question to answer, but I hope I shed a little light on it.
Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, sort of a follow-up on Laura's question. I think I'm not quite clear on, I know staff is recommending option 2, but I'm not quite clear on what the potential downside is to option 3. Is it basically that they'd spend a lot of money and we would end up with a rezone that would cause them to rethink, why did we spend all that money? Am I oversimplifying it, or what's your feeling on that?
It's more about, I'm going to take off my mask too.
Please.
I think it's more about as much about their business as it is the policies and the plan and what the city wants as the future vision for that area. And if you take a significant amount of that land area and lock it in for a decade, you just won't see change at that scale. So do a couple of, and there may be a fairness issue too, because if you say it's just these two, or maybe several other buildings come in and make huge investments over there, that's a very real possibility. Then a significant amount of that land area is locked in for a decade. Maybe that's okay. But it's actually a smaller land area than the East Side Innovation District. It's 120 acres versus 150, 160. So it's a smaller, more compact area. And so that's why cities do the moratoriums, is they're trying to stop the presses for a while and rethink before big investment is made and things don't change. So that's why cities kind of lock that in, and that's why we're recommending that as well.
So we could get into a situation where there's just too many unintended consequences for us, and we could be delaying almost undermining what we're trying to accomplish. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And Al, I know it's a lot to think about here. So just take this example. I appreciate Graymark coming here and explaining where they're at in their project, and we're certainly welcome their investment here in town. So exterior improvements, $4 to $5 million budget. Based on existing codes, et cetera, they're going to, have a plan for that. On the other side, 22 months from now, on the other side of the specific plan, is it likely aspects of a $4 or $5 million improvement would be different? We now have new streetscape requirements, new sidewalk requirements. What would be different in their plan, would you guess, on the other side of a specific planning process?
It's more about what is allowed there, how much is allowed, how significant the city approaches housing and mixed use, where perhaps the best locations for certain types of uses like mixed use are. There could be locations within the specific plan area that are more conducive to it, or maybe because there's less contamination, or because of where it is on a roadway, on a main thoroughfare, and it's access to freeways and other things like that. So the context of the property matters as well. But I mean, kind of going back, just so I remember to mention, if you're just changing out windows, we should be able to allow that to occur if it's just a window that they're replacing. But I think that what we thought when we talked to Graymark is that they were doing a pretty significant facade improvement.
Mm-hmm. And is it likely that their planning of that $5 million improvement might be benefited on the other side of the specific planning process, because it would, be part of a larger scheme and fit into more of the general development and pattern that we decide upon over there?
I mean, it certainly would be an upgrade to the appearance of that building, and if the area is going to change as a result of the specific plan in a rapid fashion, it's going to upgrade and everything's going to look better. Their building will already kind of be a beacon for those new businesses, might serve as a aesthetic catalyst or something. I mean, if that's what you're referring to, I'm not sure that there's any connection back, to the past or something like that with. Or the future other than that?
Yeah, no, I was actually just asking if the specific plan would in some way make their planning better, like it would, yeah.
I get it. Not necessarily. I mean, it may have, landscaping requirements or, how the frontage should look or some, maybe parking shouldn't be at the front of the building, and you should have, there are certain standards that will probably be applied in the specific plan that would apply, but I don't think it would affect them, until they really wanted to do something significant there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Vice Mayor Rack.
Sorry to keep this going. Al had one last question, which I think will help me understand and clarify a little bit. Well, so the Graymark project and others say, if we were to move forward and allow them to do the facade, that would, in some cases, if I understand it right, make it easier and make it more difficult us. I think that you're talking more than 10 years or decade, because that would permit somebody to change, a business to change hands. Right, and then that business can now go in and do the interior and the exterior. Now that business has changed hands, and we're now looking at maybe 20 years or a much longer time period. Right, it's not just the existing structures. Anybody could buy a property and just kind of do the same thing, and now that's locked in, and that use is locked in for a much more longer time period. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
And it could be more of these larger parcels that come in. We have 2. There could be others.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Al, I have a couple questions too. So you mentioned the windows. I keyed in on that too, that's probably part of the exemption. They also mentioned flooding issues. Is that something that is a public health and safety risk that would also potentially be exempted?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, if it's an engineering issue and if it's a health and safety, like if they know that something's failing in the creek or that, their business or their property is in danger of flooding, we would work with them on that. I mean, unless Greg, has any other guidance on that.
Yeah, I think those are part of maintenance. If there's some danger to the property caused by a failure of infrastructure or whether it's on site or that might affect their property, I think that would be exempted. And we do have an ongoing project with Belmont Creek anyway there that is not covered by the moratorium.
Thank you. My second question, so I'm kind of struggling with some things too, and one of them is the PG&E property. And you mentioned fairness issues and locking in land, right? And we're saying no to some fairly substantial exterior developments elsewhere, but yet we're going to green light a 50,000 square foot project for PG&E. And, I hear the staff's, recommendation that PG&E is not likely to go anywhere, but nothing is ever 100% certain. And I think that looking at it from a fairness issue, I'm really struggling with the fact that that application is not complete. It hasn't made it over the hurdle that we said the Quarry project did. And yet we're saying no to all of these other building owners for much more minor improvements than what PG&E is going to do. So can you walk me through your thought process on that?
Well, it is a public utility. It benefits the ratepayers. A lot of us, in the county use PG&E. That's one of their key stations in the Bay Area and the peninsula. So that's part of the thinking. But if you look at it the other way, the specific plan could have some design standards in it that could apply to that building. So they would be foregoing the potential design standards or requirements or any community benefits and things like that that might be contained in the specific plan. So some of these are quite difficult, right? It's not cut and dry. So this is one of those. So that's, and we heard a little bit of support for maybe looking at PG&E as part of one of the options. So that's why we put it in there.
And so just to be clear, PG&E, if they were to proceed now, would not be subject to community benefits the same way they might be under the specific plan?
It's a possibility, yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
I was just thinking maybe we ought to close the public hearing. I'll move to close the public hearing.
Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. Okay. With that, I will open it up for council discussion. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm kind of torn because option 3 sounds to me like a slippery slope. I guess it's probably the best way to put it. I like option 2, even with the PG&E exception. But I wonder, and you know, Bob Grasilio always used to say, is there a way to split the baby on this? And what I mean by that is, are we opening up ourselves to the proverbial can of worms if we adopt option 2, but maybe do a version of allowing exterior options? I'm just thinking out loud here. You know, when businesses invest quite a bit of money on their business model, I thought Adam, though, raised an excellent point that, you know, if it can be just a continuing process where you have a piece of property that just never gets subject to turnover or the specific plan. I get that. I'm just wondering if you see any options to modify option 2 in a way that does not let that happen. So I guess that's my question, either for you, Al, or for Megan.
Well, we talked about windows, which would be significant aesthetic improvement. We allow for signage, maybe painting of a building, you know, that kind of thing. I guess what our main concern was is something really significant, and what we thought we saw with at least with the Graymark project is like redoing of the exterior walls, and it was an architectural change, right? It was a very significant aesthetic difference in the type of architecture you see. It's a big upgrade and it looks great. We were thrilled to see the architecture. But it was pretty significant. And we thought it would be in the millions of dollars to do that. I mean, so there may be something in the middle where you say that if you're, you know, painting or new windows, kind of sprucing up the building as opposed to like a significant facade change, you know, changing the architectural design, you know, those kinds of things. So there may be something like that we could build into there. So it's like an interim step. Now, again, it's a 2-year process, and if they're going to be doing these very significant interior improvements, it's going to take them a while to get those built. So that's the one thing I keep thinking in my mind, well, that's going to take you a year, you know, 18 months to 2 years, you know, to do that significant interior improvement. So maybe by the time, you know, we get to, they could change out the windows, and by the time, you know, we finish with the plan or get close to it, they're ready to do their facade improvement. So I think maybe that's it. I mean, maybe there's some interim. I know it probably might not get you all the way there, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you, and I apologize to Megan for my baby splitting comment. That's probably the last thing she wants to hear right now, so I yield. Go ahead.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. So I think, I think I'm feeling like part of the challenge with this is that we don't know what we don't know because we haven't gone through the process, and so we're trying to guess, and we're trying to recognize and appreciate the business owners and their perspective on this, and I think from the other aspect of this is I appreciate the line of questioning that you, kind of, Ron, how you took it down, a little bit further, and how Adam took it another direction. And I think what I'm starting to appreciate that is if we don't call it now, when are we going to call it, right? So if we continue to allow the work to continue, when will we be ever able to realize the vision of what this particular portion of San Carlos might be for the community? And I heard you talk about earlier, Ron, how it really is the last area in San Carlos that has not yet been defined. And we've talked a lot as a council about the many needs we have as a community. Housing and creating of affordable housing has been a really big issue. We realized through the Eastside Visioning Plan the opportunity to really articulate and refine community benefits that are of interest broadly. For example, restoration of creeks. We know we have a big flooding issue on this side of town. There's an opportunity for environmental cleanup in some areas. And it's kind of finding how do we strike that balance between operating business as usual for these businesses and allowing them to continue, but doing the hard work of really saying, this is what we think this portion of San Carlos can be into the future. And I think from my perspective, I also appreciate what Mayor McDowell is suggesting around PG&E because they are a business, and yes, while they're a utility, the customer enhancements, it's not jumping off to the page to me that those customer enhancements are going to really address the things that I hear the community is interested in, right? Which is, a topic for another day. So I think at this point, I think I would be leaning more towards maybe a small carve out for external work if it's safety related, right, or energy efficient related, and not a large investment made that would lock in that design and use for decades, right? So trying to find a way to strike that balance. So I think I'm kind of leaning more towards option one at this point. Again, I'd be open to hearing perspectives from my colleagues on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I do have one additional disclosure to make. I misspoke earlier. I did meet with PG&E, and I visited their site since the last time we discussed this item. I should have disclosed that earlier. It will not affect my decision-making this evening. And then, Al, I did have a question for you. I think what we're struggling with is, I think Laura put it very well, business as usual versus making sure we're out in front of major redevelopment. Is it possible as a city to put a dollar limit on like exterior improvements? Could we say, pick a number, $50,000, $100,000 worth of improvements? I mean, if they want to just, spit things up for the next couple of years ahead of the specific plan, I don't think we should be in the way of that. So I think we're struggling with where can we draw a line like that? And is a dollar amount, is that something we can even measure or have visibility on?
Chris is nodding no. So what we usually do is ask the developer for a dollar amount of the construction, right, Chris? Is that correct? Like when someone comes in for a building permit, we ask for what's the value of construction, right? And that's how we base our permit fees on it. Mm-hmm. So we do rely on the applicant to come in with what they think is the dollar value. We don't go back and do a bunch of, number crunching on that. So theoretically, you could do that, I think, yes. You could say if it's $1 million as the cutoff or whatever. but I would have to refer to the city attorney in terms of how to practically add that into the ordinance tonight. But theoretically, from my perspective, yes, you could do it.
Okay, thank you, Al. Then I guess I would just say first, I strongly support the specific plan in our Northeast area. As my colleagues pointed out, we need to get the good planning done over there. It is an opportunity for the city. This moratorium is a necessary step in this process. I'm glad we've taken the time and done the work to make this moratorium more reasonable and flexible. So I certainly support option 1. With regard to option 2, I was impressed when I toured the PG&E site on how the nature of their improvements are specifically to allow for better responsiveness and service, given all the pressure PG&E has been under. My perception at the time was they are trying to respond to that, and this will increase their ability to respond. I'm personally glad to have PG&E in San Carlos and not, for example, across the bridge. I do think we probably get better service when our poles are down, when we need help from PG&E. Having them here is a good thing. Could they wait 22 months? Possibly. So I am interested in how all my colleagues feel on that. And then with regard to option 3, so I do agree with staff that it is troublesome to allow significant investment with a specific plan. 22 months, Al made the point that isn't, that's not 4 years. That is a period of time that can go pretty quickly through a planning and construction process. I don't think we want to stand in the way of minor improvements that could allow a business to present a better front to its customers, et cetera. I would support painting. I would support a small dollar amount. Obviously, that'll be hard for us to measure, hard for us to monitor. So I think it does need to be a small amount, like maybe $50,000 or $100,000, enough to spruce it up a little bit, but not such an, if we said $1 million, I think, they could do a lot more than that and would have a hard way of trying to figure that out. So in summary, I support option 2, and I would support a $50,000 or $100,000 exception for exterior developments in a minor flavoring of option 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And John, thank you for that reminder, because I need to also disclose that I spoke with PG&E after the meeting. I didn't tour the site, though, but did speak with them. So I'd say I'll work backwards. I'm not really comfortable with option number 3. I do think it's a slippery slope for us. I am a little concerned about well, I appreciate, John, your point on the dollar amount. I'm just, if we were going to make some changes, I would rather be more specific about what the allowed uses are to do that, because I think the cost might vary based on building size and other things. I think it's difficult to calculate, and you might say, like, well, you're not sort of providing that fairness, versus if it's paint and windows or something very specific might be a better compromise on that. So I would suggest that. I don't know what the right pieces are, but I'd feel more comfortable on that end. I'm okay with the PG&E side. I'd be happy to support number 2. I'll say from firsthand, we had a gas leak at our house, and I was amazed at how quickly they were there and responsive, and it was because they were right there by it. So if we're looking at more improving customer service and response time, I think that's a benefit for the community, and it's an exception worth taking. So I'd be obviously fine with number 1 and number 2, and if we wanted to do some small modifications around that sort of paint some very specific items on the outside, I would be willing to consider that.
Thank you. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you. I was worried that we were starting to create another fine mess for you guys to clean up. So I think we're getting a little bit of clarity of direction here. I'm also wondering, and this is more a question to my colleagues up here, if we can pass this or vote on one of these options, and for the record, I am in favor of option 2 as well, but maybe include a review provision after 10 months, 12 months, to get feedback from you, or sooner if you believe that it's not going the way as planned. You know, we don't know. Sometimes we do stuff, and it doesn't go the way we thought it would go. Either it's going better, it's going worse, or it's going exactly as we thought it would. But I think I'd feel more comfortable if I knew that at some point, we'll have to decide what that is, that we get some feedback on what's happening over there. And if what we're passing is, or deciding on rather, is actually turned out to be the best decision. You know, at the moment, I'm comfortable with option 2, and I also want to disclose and thank you everybody for reminding me about the PG&E. I did I didn't meet with the PG&E representative formally, but I encountered him at a social event, and he explained to me exactly what PG&E is planning, and they all sounded fairly reasonable to me. You know, energy improvements, public safety. I think cleaning up. I think he said something about cleaning up some toxics and that sort of thing. But you know, given that, that's why I'm comfortable with that option. But I'm also wondering if there's any agreement that we can build some sort of review provision if we go forward on this, or when we go forward on this.
Thank you, Ron. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you. I also want to thank my colleagues for reminding me. I did speak to the PG&E representative as well, and I also appreciate Councilmember Dugan's kind of further clarification in terms of what you observed is that part of their build out is to improve response times, and for the record, I have heard that that's of a concern to the community, so just wanted to clarify that. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with my comments here. Ron, I appreciate your idea about a review period. I think that's a good idea. My concern, I don't want to shoot holes in our specific plan before we even get started. And I'm really concerned that the more carve-outs we do, the less valuable it's going to be in the end. And I want to make sure, I think we all want to have a very thoughtful process and a comprehensive process. And I guess that's, I'm still getting hung up, I guess, on the PG&E project because, as Al said, there could be some community benefits involved. You know, our East Side Vision Plan has really beautiful street improvements and landscaping, and I feel like none of that will be considered if we allow this project to go forward at this time. I, too, have met with PG&E about certain issues in our community, and unfortunately, some of those issues, they have not been responsive at all. And I'm very disappointed in that. So I can see that there needs to be improvement. So I'm still having a little bit of a hard time. I understand the concern about painting and doing some minor improvements, but I think the cost of that does vary by building, and it would be very difficult to calculate that out. So, yeah, that's where I stand right now. Vice Mayor Rack, I see you wanted to share something.
I was ready to make a motion if we wanted to, if people, or we can talk more. And this 9B is option 2, is that correct? What's printed here is for us is right. Oh, I see, got it, okay. I move to proceed with option number 2, adopting interim ordinance number
1582.
1582, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos extending a moratorium on the approval of applications for 1, lot line adjustments and the subdivision of land within the Northeast area in accordance with the City of San Carlos subdivision regulations and Subdivision Map Act. 2, design review, use permit, temporary use permit, plan development zoning amendment, waiver, variance, general plan amendment, development agreement, or any other discretionary approval from the City of San Carlos necessary for the development of a site within the Northeast area in accordance with the San Carlos zoning ordinance, or 3, a building permit required for construction and or alterations on property within the Northeast area in accordance with the San Carlos Municipal Code, subject to certain enumerated exceptions.
I will second. I just want to ask Greg, do we need to formally include any review provision, or is that something that staff can just come back and tell us?
I don't think we need to include that in the ordinance unless it's the council's preference, because we can always review it, and we're always monitoring the situation.
Okay, then I stand with my second.
I'm going to open it up to discussion before we call the roll. I am going to vote for the moratorium because I think that it's really important that we are thoughtful in this process, but I will reluctantly vote for option number 2. Is there any other further discussion? Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I was just going to say that, you know, I am very disappointed in the mayor's experience with PG&E and you know, I hope that they are providing good, honest service when called upon in our community, and we will have to work to hold them to that standard. And I will just say, Madam Mayor, that you know, that is a large piece of property, and there are more phases to that project. They will continue to have to evolve, and we will have a chance to work with them under the specific plan as that evolves over time.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Ruck.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I appreciate all the comments, all the public comment, and the discussion from staff. I thought it was really, excuse me, from council. I thought it was helpful to hear from everyone. And I also I was remiss in not sort of. I would like to back up the mayor's remarks that, you know, our experience with PG&E and the industrial arts area and their responsiveness is pretty abysmal. It's you know, it's been a big disappointment for us, and it's unfortunate, and I hope that that can change over time.
Okay, I see no other speaker requests. So, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'm going to call for a 10-minute break before we tackle the next item. Thank you. Item 10, study session, discuss and provide direction on updates for the user fee schedule with Rebecca Mendenhall.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Rebecca Mendenhall, Administrative Services Director. So tonight we're going to review our user fee study. Conducting a comprehensive study is not an annual requirement, but best practices state that this should be done every 5 years, and the last time we did one was in 2017. A rate study is also important when there are significant shifts in the organization, and given the program enhancements and additional staffing in this coming budget, we felt it would be good to incorporate these changes into the rate study, so the timing was good. In October of last year, the city hired NBS to perform our overhead cost allocation review and the comprehensive fee and rate study. And Nicole Kissam from NBS is here tonight to walk you through that process. Once she completes her presentation, I'm going to come back and make some additional comments before we take before we take your questions. And we do have the departments here as well to answer questions.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Nicole Kissam. I'm a Director of Financial Consulting at NBS and was the project manager on your fee study. I'll take you through a brief presentation about the study's process and results. So we'll just cover, the basics of a fee study and the industry standards around that, and give you a little summary of the results from the project, and then leave some time for discussion at the end. So fee studies in California are pretty routine, and the goal of a fee study is basically to determine what the full cost of providing various services are for which fees are charged. And then once we have that in a report, the next step is to set the fees accordingly through policy discussion. The key underlying considerations in any fee study is, of course, compliance with state law. We want to make sure that we're following a defensible approach to the study and staying in line with industry standards. We do have discussions about what current service levels are and what type of data we have to validate fees. We talk through what the total cost of providing services are, and then we're here also to consider what the local cost recovery policy is for San Carlos. Fees in California are governed by the California Constitution, first and foremost, Article 13C, which defines the difference between a tax and a fee. And fees are not taxes as long as they meet one of 7 stated exceptions to the definition of a tax. And those 3 with kind of the diamond marking there in italics are the ones that require a cost of service basis in order to be valid. So those types of charges cannot exceed the cost of providing services. We looked at all city fees for services, finance, clerk, technology, cost recovery, general plan cost recovery, planning, building, public works, land use, you name it. The entire city master fee schedule has been reviewed. And the project approach we follow is first and foremost data collection. We also look through the fee structure, hundreds of fee names and categories, and talk about whether there's a more fair or equitable way to structure a fee, or that are all the fees still being used? Do any need to be removed? Do any need to be added? And then we go through a cost analysis on 3 levels. So we look at total costs on the annual level, total costs on the hourly level, and total costs at the individual fee level. And where we are right now in the process is obviously discussing the outcomes and looking at a policy discussion. We talk about total costs and what does total costs mean. In a fee study, it's really all direct and indirect costs that can be identified through an analysis. And the premise for that is that we include estimated and reasonable costs of providing services. So the formula for a fee calculation is really pretty simple and straightforward. It's the underlying data and the rigor of analysis that goes into it that's a little more complex. But really, any fee can be calculated looking at, what are the direct costs, the salaries and benefits related to providing the service, what types of operating costs are associated with providing that service, what type of shared or allocated overhead costs should be considered. And then when we know that amount on an annual level, we can divide by how many hours we have to provide those services. And we can multiply that cost per hour by how long does it take to provide the service. And that really gives us the maximum fee amount. And then in some cases, you might have pass-through costs for consultant time or something like that. So we'll talk a little bit about hourly rate outcomes in a couple slides. So I just wanted to illustrate, how we calculate an hourly rate. This is not a specific rate to San Carlos, but on an annual level, in this example, we're looking at the personnel budget. We're looking at some operating costs. We've identified overhead. So for this division, we have $325,000 in total costs of providing services, divided by available work hours of 2,500 for an average hourly rate of $130 per hour. And then on the right side of the screen, you can see that if a service takes 4 hours, the maximum fee for our staff would be $520. And in this case, there was some consultant costs added for a total cost of $1,020. It's kind of the basic methodology that we follow for every fee. So once we've done that across hundreds of fees, in this case, really where we're at is we know what the full cost of service is. We feel comfortable that the results of the study reflect the full cost of providing services, and we've compared that to, on average, how much revenue do we collect from current fees at the individual fee level and in total. And the discussion and the decision from here is how much of that gap is appropriate to close for whatever reason, and what degree of subsidy. When we don't recover the cost through fees for services, then there's a subsidy that has to come from another revenue source, usually the general fund. So this red arrow, I think, is what the council needs to decide. How much of that do you want to close? So here's the summary of results on an annual level. This compares the annual current revenues by fee program. Bottom line is $7.3 million. You can see it broken out over the different types of fee programs and divisions in the city's organizational structure. Our study found that the full cost of those services is $11.1 million. So we've got about a 66% recovery rate between the costs of providing fee-related services and the revenues received for those services. And then staff has provided some initial recommended fees. So if those were adopted, then we would have an 89% recovery rate. So I'm just going to touch briefly on the different fee programs and what the major changes were in those different departments. For administrative fees, we're talking about miscellaneous copy fees, document certification, and research fees. The study found that the fully burdened cost per hour for administrative services is $193. Fees related to business license program processing were removed, as those have been outsourced. The processing of those licenses has been outsourced. And then with administrative fees and certain other fee programs, there's a lot of fees here that need to be listed, but they're not necessarily allowed to be charged at full cost recovery. With planning fees, the fully burdened hourly rate during this study came out at an average of $300 per hour. One fee was removed, and then a number of fees were added to adapt to how planning provides their services now. And then most of those fees are recommended initially at 100% cost recovery, except for the ones you see up here on the screen. Services like appeals and protected tree removal permits, types of activities that you want to encourage, protection of small businesses and so forth. For public works, there were two rates that we calculated, one for the engineering division, one for the maintenance division. We didn't do a lot of cleanup because 5 years ago we did kind of an overhaul, so we really didn't change the fee structure or fee program very much. Fees were added for parklet program and tree replanting. And most fees are recommended at 100% cost recovery, except for some fees set by the state and debris box storage container permits and some of the parking permits in the city. For a building, fully burdened hourly rate, cost per hour came out at about $206 per hour. I think the most significant change we made in the building fees this time was that we needed to add tiers in what they call the scaled fee structure, because San Carlos has quite a few very large projects. So we created an economy of scale in the way that the fees are calculated for larger projects. And here we have fees typically, and here recommended at 100% cost recovery, except for some of the smaller permits for water heaters, et cetera. With police, police departments tend to have very few fees. They're usually miscellaneous administrative fees for accident reports, et cetera. We calculate rates, differential rates between sworn personnel and non-sworn personnel. We deleted a couple fees, and really there were not a lot of changes made in recommended fee amounts in general. For Parks and Recreation, those fees are somewhat of a different animal than other fees in the fee list. Different type of fee program has different considerations. So there's a limited analysis there of kind of an overall annual cost recovery analysis. We did look at hourly rates and some permits and service request fees. And then, let's see, we also helped review some of the field use fees, which Rebecca will come in and talk about in just a second. Also should be noted that an important part of any fee study is always doing a comparison to other surrounding agencies. That's what we did here. They're a little bit difficult. They're pretty high level comparison because different agencies call fees for services, the same service, different names. They also don't look at their fees routinely, or they may look at them more routinely. So sometimes those comparative surveys need to be taken with a grain of salt. And that's the end of my presentation. Rebecca, did you want to add a few things? Thank you. Here for questions.
So I just wanted to add a couple of things. One, Nicole mentioned the per player fees. So NBS did assist us with our calculation. This was a field use fee that was established back in 2010 when the synthetic field was approved for Highlands Park. In 22-23, or for this next fiscal year, staff has estimated the total replacement cost and maintenance for all city fields at approximately $3.9 million, or an annual cost of $515,000. When you divide that among the 6,000 organized play participants, that equates to about $86 a player. Our current fees are $34 for soccer and $48 for baseball and softball. So given the large increase, staff is recommending to tier this increase over the next 2 years. And depending on the conversation tonight, the outcome of that, we'll reach out to the youth sports groups before anything comes back for adoption. Fire department fees were not included in this study since these services are contracted from the City of Redwood City, and they provide us the billing list. So as done in prior years, the city recommends the adoption of those fees based on the Redwood City's schedule. Impact fees such as the park facility fees, the sewer capacity charge, and the traffic impact fee were also not included in this study, as those adjustments are governed by the municipal code. So those adjustments will be brought forward separately at the second meeting in June. And so the next steps is, based on your feedback tonight, this item will return to council for your approval and adoption with an effective date of 60 days following that adoption, as we have a 60-day noticing period that we need to do for development fees. One thing I did want to note is the recommendations provided by staff are based on policy decisions that the council has chosen in the past. So, you know, obviously, this is the city's fee schedule. The council can make policy changes, but I just wanted to give you a background as to where the recommendations were coming from. So with that, we're available for any questions.
Okay, thank you both. Questions? Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure which of you this is for, but we've done these fee studies over the years, as I recall, and we get similar the numbers change, but it's sort of the same process. Do we always get sort of back up to 88, 89, 90%, and then things change and, you know, costs increase, so our cost recovery erodes over those years? So are we pretty much repeating that process to get back to where we're comfortable with?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then the other question I had was, it seems to me that comparing, I appreciate the outreach to other cities, but it also seems it may not mean a lot to us because our fees are based on, you know, our cost of labor and our services and the things that we deal with. So they're really unique to us. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, all right. That was it. Thanks.
Very succinct answers. Good, thank you. I don't see anyone else's hands raised. I had a question. We had talked, when we were doing the heritage tree ordinance, we had talked about waiving the fee potentially for removing dead trees. And I'm not sure how that kind of fell in the fee schedule, if that's something that's contemplated or not.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council. So we did not include that specific waiver in the fee schedule. We did include the proposal for reducing fees for all permits by 50%, but that is something you could include as a specific item separate from the regular tree permits if you did choose to do that.
And can you remind us, just so we're not all flipping through paper up here, what is the reduced fee?
So for protected tree removal and protected pruning permits, the actual fee is $599, and the recommended cost recovery is 50%, so that would be $300. We're also recommending a 50% recovery rate for the protected tree notice. So as we were doing the ordinance, there was definitely interest in noticing the neighbors, but the full cost recovery of that, again, would be $300. So we were proposing 50% to encourage more people to apply for permits.
Okay, thank you. And then I wanted to thank Rebecca for your comments about the sports teams and reaching out. I noted that, we're looking at an increase of almost $50 for baseball and softball. So I don't want to price any kids out of sports. So I appreciate that outreach is going to happen.
Yeah, Amy's group will take care of that.
Okay. So then how will that be brought back to us? The feedback will just come back the next time council sees this? And then we'll decide again?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great.
We can incorporate that into the staff report.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. So I appreciate this, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I'm sure lots of charts and tables were created. So one of the things that just really jumped out at me is that the fee increase on some light items is as high as 6 times as what it currently is now. And when I look, for example, at the Community Development Department, Planning Department, things around single-family homes, adding an addition, and there's another section around housing as well. It looks like it's kind of based on the valuation of the property. One of the things that we value is wanting to create more housing in the community, and I'm just a little concerned that that kind of the jump in fees is going to be potentially problematic. So is there any insight into kind of what the price elasticity, I guess, might be with respect to these types of fees? Because it's just kind of extraordinary that the fees would jump so high. And I know we have, as a council, we can decide what we want to do there, but I'm just trying to understand what the potential impact is going to be on our residents by adjusting these, if we were to move forward with these as they are recommended. So I'm just concerned about some of these line items.
So the reason you're seeing some of these fees jump is, one, there may be additional time involved than there was 5 years ago when we did this before. There's also additional costs that have been incorporated just with the growth in the Community Development Department, as well as consultants that are included in some of the costs that go into the hourly rate that is then calculated to determine the total cost of the fee. Again, as you mentioned, I mean, it's the council's decision if you want to charge something less than 100%. When we brought this forward 5 years ago, the council decided they wanted to have 100% cost recovery on all of these fees. So again, it's up to the council to decide.
And is the philosophy, because I also observed, for example, that in the consent calendar we signed off on a report that showed that tax revenues are up 10.5%. We've also talked as a council in the past that we're sensitive to the fact that inflation is ongoing, gas prices are high. So could you talk a little bit about the difference between collection of tax revenues in general and provision of city services, right? So many of these line items are provision of city services, and so there could be a guiding principle around the fact that, part of what we're doing with the tax revenues that are up is to provide these city services, but now we're going kind of a per specific service, charging 100% cost recovery. So I'm just trying to reconcile, what the community may be expecting of us from provision of services and what they're paying already.
Mm-hmm. So traditionally, fee-based services in municipal government would apply to a service that an individual is receiving as opposed to a service being provided to the community, right? So when you're choosing to, remodel your kitchen or put in a new bathroom or do all those kinds of things, the idea is that your tax dollars, right, aren't meant to cover somebody's specific project, and that's a unique service that they're electing to choosing to utilize, and so that they pay for it through a fee-based service as opposed to, you know, a firefighting service that's out there providing service to the entire public. You don't charge just because you've had a emergency medical response, because that service it's paid for. It's always there. So whether you've used it or not is irrelevant to the community. The community has that blanket protection 24/7 that they're paying for. Roads, you know, park, playgrounds, those types of things that are available to the whole community are really, you know, what those tax dollars, the difference between the use of those tax dollars and a service that would be elective for somebody. You know, we may have residents who live in town for 20 years and never come in for a single permit. And you may have somebody who lives in town for 5 years and comes in for 10. So that's the historic distinction.
Thank you. And then what about, I heard some comment earlier, I think Mayor McDowell talked about this, the kind of the equity component and making sure that if these fees are raised, or that we have, make sure that we are, we have an equity component and that we're inclusive in our approach to that. So is that like a separate type of a program where people would apply and it would come out of some sort of scholarship program? I'm thinking about in particular the sports field type programs.
Good evening. My mind did go that route also, the scholarship program we have, the fee assistance. But those are for our city operated programs. So that could be something that council could designate. You currently have designated $10,000 annually towards our fee assistance program. And you could also choose to designate X number of dollars to go towards the youth sport organizations whose participants may not be able to afford the per player fee, which it does just go back into those registration fees for AYSO, Little League, softball, San Carlos United Soccer.
Thank you, Laura. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And so, Rebecca, did I hear that right? That so 5 years ago, Council put it all the way up to 100% fee recovery through the schedule?
For certain planning fees, the appeal fee was always kept lower.
Okay.
And some of the other fees, I can't remember exactly what they were, but they were kept lower as well. But for some of the design fees, like the single family residence and those types of things, those were set at 100%.
I see. So 66. So it didn't go from 100 to 66 because 66 is like the average of everything, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, but it must have dropped quite a bit, that erosion that Ron had talked about. How? But have we not had a CPI or any indexed adjustment over the past 5 years?
Yes. So once we do the fee study, then every year we bring it forward and we make changes if we need to add fees or remove fees. But we recommend that we use a CPI component every year in between these major fee studies.
Okay, and we've done that over the past 5 years? Okay, so this significant erosion, there's with CPI, with an index in there, there's more than just erosion going on. I mean, clearly, our costs must be significantly higher. Is that, yeah. And so that kind of leads to my real question, which is, I had the same observation Laura had, that some of those planning and building fee costs are just dramatically higher, kind of surprisingly higher. And I am wondering if this might be the reason. So we've foreseen all this significant commercial development coming on the east side, and we've approved some significant budget increases to the planning department. Is that what is then being reflected as we fully burden out the calculation down to even the residential fees?
I'll let Nicole maybe cover this a little bit if I don't cover it right, or if I don't answer it right. But when we review the staff time, we allocate the staff to certain areas. So not all staff are working on the permitting fees. So if they're working on advanced planning, then they're they're not included in some of these fee calculations.
Okay. Okay. I mean, so that's right. If the overall budget of the planning department goes up, that doesn't necessarily reflect in just one aspect, like the residential planning fees?
Correct. It also, there's so many factors that go into this. So when we started with these fees, it was 5 years ago, and over these 5 years, the makeup of the department has changed, the allocation of who's working on what has changed, the costs have gone up, the time involved has changed. So there's a lot of factors that are going into these increases.
And I understand it's very complicated, but I mean, just some of these increases, particularly on residential, just seem fairly dramatic, and I'm just want to make, I just want to make sure we're not burdening our residences because we've just staffed up our planning department because of all this impending commercial development. Maybe more analysis is needed, but I definitely want to understand a clear answer to that question before, I'm willing to approve these dramatic increases on residential development. And I mean, this is a study session, so this is like, next time we can get in more detail on this.
So just to add a little bit more background, some of the calculations, so for example, the single family review, the number of hours have actually gone up as well in the past 5 years. As you know, we always want to provide great customer service, and we found that a lot of that, especially with single family homes, has resulted in multiple hours of meeting with neighbors or explaining plans. And that's something we always want to do regardless of how much the application, how many hours they paid for. So as just an example, there was a house that was appealed numerous times to both Planning Commission and Council, and the appeal fee is set at a lower rate, so that wasn't 100%, but I mean, we easily spent 30 to 4 hours each time that went to appeal. And so that's and a lot of it was just neighbor outreach, verifying that the applicants did their outreach, comparing the plans. So we really tried to this time figure out how much time we're actually spending, and I think it has gone up. I mean, we have spent more time with neighbors and preparing for the committees, and so, a lot of times items might get continued, so we're working again with the applicant to make sure the design's okay.
Okay.
And just to add one other thing, as Rebecca mentioned, the items that weren't at 100% or that were at 100%, like this one originally was, we didn't want to come back with a proposal to lower the recovery. We wanted to show you where we were at and then have obviously council make the policy call on that. So that's why we didn't propose less for single family residential.
Got it. Appreciate that. And then probably another question for you, Andrea. The other one that stood out to me where I'm kind of wrestling with kind of big project versus normal project is under signage. So, I guess our costs went from roughly $2,000 all the way up to $6,000 under sign review. And I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity to, just like we bifurcate different development projects, is it worth us considering perhaps a small sign versus a big sign? Just $6,000 becomes a pretty significant review for just, a small shop downtown, versus Alexandria's new monument sign or something.
Okay, sure. So the three different fees. So the sign program, which is the $6,000 one, those are generally speaking a one-time application. So that's for your Alexandria, your larger projects. The commercial center at Best Buy, for example, where they come in with this big program, one time usually, here's the size, here's the design, and then subsequent permits for that are done at staff level. So the sign program itself is, usually goes with either a PD or a larger development, and is generally a one-time thing unless they want to change something major about it. They're also usually asking for more signage than is allowed by the code.
Oh, so this wouldn't just be a new restaurant downtown or a new retailer downtown. This isn't, okay, that helps.
So the sign staff level, which is about $1,200, that would be a downtown business or any other business that's not subject to Planning Commission review. The Planning Commission review signs, which are not sign programs, are about $4,500, and that's going to be signs facing 101 that are not part of a sign program, or the large, pole signs you might see along 101.
I see. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, that was just dramatic if we're talking about small signs, but we're not. So thank you.
Sure.
All right, that's all I had.
Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate all the questions. Can you, Rebecca, so I know I'm looking at the slide on the recommended cost recovery. So if we're asking for 100% in planning, why does it say the recommended cost recovery is 93%? Or am I missing something on that?
Not all of the fees are set at 100%.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So the overall number is
Oh, the
93, but
overall.
certain planning fees got, okay,
Right,
thank
like
you.
the appeal is set at what,
Got it.
30%? Yeah,
So can I ask then a question on the appeal process? And I don't know if there's something to do around this. So I believe, Andrea, the property you're talking about, I believe, was from I know they're a residential developer, not a homeowner, right? Who I'm not sure how much money that cost the city for this process on that. Is there a way to recover, I'm not interested in sort of gouging the individual homeowner, but when you have a large developer who's developing, could be dozens of houses around town, is there any way to bifurcate those fees?
I'll defer to our city attorney, but did want to clarify for that one, the developer appealed, but the neighbors did as well. So it was a back and forth.
Right, I understand that.
Yeah, so
So it was a combination in this case.
Correct, yeah.
Well, I think my take is, and I'll defer to our consultant, is that we're trying to be an accurate cost recovery, so it might be difficult to do an accurate on a case-by-case basis. Some of the larger projects, though, where our code allows for recovery of direct costs, we do have that method of recovery for larger projects. Like my hourly rate gets passed on through when I'm working on a development project to the developer, and they pay that full fee, the full hourly rate for the special project fee for city attorney services. So it does apply, but on the residential projects, I don't think we've set it up to apply to smaller projects, because it'd be hard to differentiate between different owners, it does average out, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we look at our past history to develop the fees, so if there's a application or our staff time overall is higher, then the fee can be higher. But again, that might be like on the appeals, where we're only doing 30% recovery on those anyway, to recognize that we want the public to be able to appeal something affordably.
And just to add a little more, there is a reconciliation process that's done to make sure that, when we look at the total number of hours available, and how it applies to the fee schedule, that we're not, we can only have a certain amount of hours that we can apply to these fees as well.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Thank you. And just, I certainly appreciate what Amy suggested. And if we need to, I'd be curious as we kind of look forward on the city-run recreational programs, if that budget number is sufficient and adequate if we're going to change fees on that. So that would be one I'd be interested in looking at. And then I guess from my end, I would, and this is more, I guess, a comment than a question, I'm comfortable with the 100% cost recovery fee for planning and for building and that work. I think in general, in this community, when people are doing improvements and remodels, they are recovering their costs themselves because of the property value is increasing. And I don't think we should be, it's based on individual usage, so I don't know that we should be burdening the rest of the taxpayers on fees in those cases.
I see no other comments. We can move to public comment.
I don't see any members of the public raising their hand in chambers, and there are no hands on Zoom.
Okay. Great. Any further council discussion? I know this is a study session. Any other comments from council on this tonight? Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just summarize my comments like this. I think 66% to 89% in a single step is too steep in 1 year. That's, I think, calculated out at $2.6 million. So I would support stretching that out over, 2 or 3 years, if that's makes sense from the staff side as you look at this further. And then I guess I would just want to assign a bit of homework. I really do want to make sure that our increase in staffing and budgeting on our planning, because of all the impending commercial development coming, I just want to make sure that somehow isn't bleeding over into higher cost calculations on the residential side. Because I don't think that's fair to our residential, and there are some dramatic increases. I appreciate Andrea's comments on how there is more work there, and so that should be recovered. But I think that's worth a second look. And then I certainly support our ongoing subsidies on many of the park and rec fees. I thought staff dialed those in pretty appropriately, and I think most of that reflects kind of our history on those, and I continue to support that. And I also support the continued indexing, especially in this inflationary period. That's going to be important. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. I appreciate Councilmember Dugan's comments with respect to cost efficiencies. I would also just, be curious, and I don't know what the path forward would be, but where is it appropriate, for example, for senior level staff members to handle a particular line item versus junior level? And making sure that from a dollar cost averaging, right, that we're being efficient and providing, best pricing, if you will, to the broader community. So just to build on that. I also had in my notes to take a look at graduating fee increases over time as opposed to doing dramatic jumps. I'm really concerned about going from where we are now to, doubling that, and in some cases going up to 6 times. I think over time would be appropriate. And then also taking a look at equity and inclusion program for the team-based sports that are using our fields, because I appreciate that we're trying to make sure we put money in the bank to replace the synthetic turf, but at the same time, I don't want it to be at the cost of a kid not participating, because that does have a direct impact on the broader community, not just that individual. So thank you.
I concur with the comment too about looking at our youth programs, and I know that's duly noted, so thank you, Amy. I see no further comments. Last call. Okay, great discussion. Any other guidance that you would like from council this evening? Okay. All right, we will move on to item 11, agenda setting. Items discussed in this agenda setting section will be considered by the council for placing on a future agenda. No action will be taken on these items at this meeting. Any of my colleagues have an item to raise? I see Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like us to perhaps consider as a council making a recommendation to our voters that we eliminate the treasury position. As I understand it, our an elected treasury position is a largely obsolete position. Most of the substantive role has been assumed by professional staff. Many or even most of our neighboring cities have already eliminated an elected treasurer. Doesn't seem, from what I can gather, to add a lot of value, but it does have costs, and as we saw tonight, it has some degree of exposure to our city as well. I don't perceive any particular hurry around that. I think it's probably too late for this election cycle, so this would be something perhaps we would consider recommending in the 2024 ballot when our treasurer was naturally finishing up. And I thought maybe perhaps we could first hear from our city manager, Jeff, on his thoughts on the treasurer position, and then see what my colleagues think about this.
I'm not sure if I can answer that tonight, as this isn't on the agenda, so I'll defer to Greg. I'm happy to answer it if I can answer it.
I think that, the way we've structured this is to have a more substantive discussion about these things. We get the advance putting on it so it's listed on the agenda setting, but when it's not listed there, I think the best policy is just to direct us to put it on a future agenda for discussion, and then we can give you a more broad and detailed report about the implications. I mean, we did look at, I could say this much, I mean, we've looked at it about 8 or 9 years ago. We looked at the question when we went to an appointed city clerk.
Yeah, and I can add just a couple other factual pieces of information. A number of cities in San Mateo County over the years have voted to eliminate their elected city treasurer and city clerks too, which this city did elect to remove the city clerk about 20 years ago. And in addition, many of the historic responsibilities of a city treasurer have been sort of codified either in federal, state finance laws as it relates to local government, and also in the professional job responsibilities of finance directors and CEOs and CFOs.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. And then just, I guess I'm wondering how my colleagues might feel about us taking a further look at that.
Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'm supportive of adding that agenda item.
Can I get a point of clarification, please? I thought you said we couldn't discuss this, really. We were going to wait till put it on the agenda for discussion. I'm confused at what we're doing now. I thought that was what the city attorney was recommending.
I was referring specifically to Councilmember Duggan's sort of request about my opinion about doing it, and I felt like that might be beyond the scope of not having it on the agenda.
Yeah, and I apologize, Adam. I wasn't suggesting we discuss the merits further, just discuss whether we want to consider it as a council in the future.
Sorry. I understand what you're saying, John. I appreciate that, and I know it's timely given what the actions that were taken today. I guess I keep struggling with, and I'm not saying that I'm opposed to what you're suggesting. I feel like we have this process in place, and the process keeps sort of, we don't keep following the process. And so I'm fine if we want to like look at the next meeting and have it as agenda setting for the next meeting, but I feel we just keep getting on this slippery slope of, I can bring up the next thing and let's do this now and let's do that. And I think we need to kind of keep the process. I think for legal purposes, Greg has suggested that we get ourselves potentially in trouble that way. So I just don't want to get over sort of go further than we're supposed to on this from a legal standpoint. And so I looked at Greg's guidance on this, and I will follow Greg's guidance on this. And if he says it's okay to make a decision today on it, then I'm happy to make a decision or give you my opinion on it. But I don't want to do the wrong thing here. Yeah, given the importance of what you're asking.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I think I can put it this way succinctly, that my recommendation is to follow that process. It's a process we laid out because of a decision out of the city of Novato about 4 years ago, where they talked about discussing the specifics of a potential agenda item in too much detail. So that's my preferred recommendation, but there's not a law that prohibits you from the dais setting an agenda item, but the limitation is discussing the details about it. So sometimes you can't really vet whether it's worthy of being put on an agenda unless we use our process, because you can't get the detail that you might be interested in.
I would just chime in to say is if that is our process, then we should not have agenda setting on the agenda without an agended item. So, I feel like we can set an agenda if that's part of our agenda.
Well, I think to answer that question, we put it's still on the agenda because we sometimes get requests from the public and the council it's not a council initiated item, but we want to have a place setting for that very simple discussion. Hey, so-and-so from the public wanted us to discuss this issue at a future meeting. Do we want to do that? Without, again, going into the detail of the discussion. But that's why we keep it on there. I mean, just to have some flexibility. Otherwise, we couldn't do that even. You'd have to do it during public comment. It gets really difficult to do that.
Well, I certainly acknowledge Adam's concern. I think this has come around enough. We probably need to get on the agenda that we're going to set a formal policy for how we set the agenda then, because it remains a point of confusion.
Okay, so so right now we're seeking agreement on bringing this back under the agenda setting item so we can have a more full discussion, because that is the process that's currently in place. So I will take, Ron is a yes, John is a yes. Anybody else want to bring this back as an agenda setting item so that we have the discussion on whether to bring it back to a future agenda?
Just a point of clarification, there's actually not a vote for putting something on to the agenda for agenda setting.
It doesn't have to be 3?
No. Next
Okay,
time,
for
it
agenda
would have
setting.
to be
Okay,
3.
okay, great. All right, so it's going to happen then.
It'll go on the agenda.
Agenda setting portion of the agenda.
At your next city council meeting, it will actually appear in writing under agenda setting.
Correct.
And then if you want to actually have the item, it'll take 3 votes.
Then we will vote on it.
All right.
So coming soon, John.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember Palmer Lohan, did you have an item? No agenda. I'm so glad.
I'm all out of agenda.
Okay. I did want to Crystal, I wanted to amend. I think I forgot to do something during the consent calendar, which was to abstain from J. I said I was going to abstain, but then when we voted, I don't think I said that. So I just wanted to clarify. Okay, thank you. All right, anything else this evening? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Stay well.